DA. Chapter 26. Brothers in Arms I. Ha! Finally! Percy shouted in relief as he sat on a sofa in the living room of the House of Night. He'd just finished his little talk with Lady Styx and it looked like things went well, a little too well. And here I thought she was married or something, but no, she's just been saving herself for someone special, Percy groaned while crossing his arms. Last thing I need is another goddess on my plate, he muttered before sighing. Why me? Maybe it's because you're too nice. A soft voice said right behind his ear. Wow. Percy started as he fell off the sofa and onto his ass to a chorus of giggles. He looked at his attacker, to see Rhea looking down at him with mirth in her eyes. He pouted at her, but that did nothing to stop her amusement. It didn't last though, as his pout broke into a faint smile as he stood up and walked around the sofa to hug Rhea close to him. She squeaked a little in surprise, but then he just kissed her, being all too happy to see her. She returned the kiss in kind, and for a while they just remained like that, locked in a gentle massage of lips. After they finally broke apart, Percy kept their foreheads together before whispering. Told you I'd come back in one piece. You did, Rhea replied with a smile. Percy smiled warmly at her, but then recalled what he told Nyx before he left. His face got sober as he knew he had to tell her now. Rhea noted his change in demeanor, giving him a concerned look. I need to talk to you about something, Percy said softly as he led her to the sofa and sat them both down while holding her hands. What is it, Percy? She asked gently while running her thumb over the back of his hand. Percy released a sigh as he thought about how to go about this, but honestly he sucked with these sort of things. Could he just go outright and say, Rhea, I love you, but also possibly another? That wouldn't work and he might just end up with him getting slapped, and Rhea was damn strong. He would know, she once punched him through a wall during training. Deciding to try and be as direct as possible, while also delicate, he faced Rhea. Rhea, I love you, he said softly. At his words, Rhea's face lit up with joy as she looked back at him, but before she could say anything he continued, and I have for some time, but there's more. Her face became neutral as he said that, and it honestly worried him. You see, before I came down here I was sort of falling for someone else as well. I didn't really plan on it happening, but I'm pretty sure that I like her, maybe even love her too. So what are you asking me? Rhea said in an even tone. Well, I don't know, Percy said with a defeated slump of the shoulders. I want to stay with you and make you happy, but I just couldn't hide this from you. He suddenly turned his head down, letting his midnight hair obscure his eyes. I'd understand if you don't want to keep seeing me, knowing that you aren't the only one in my heart and all bum mph. Percy was shot up when Rhea suddenly grabbed his face and pulled him into a searing kiss. He was completely at her mercy as her lips worked around his, nibbling him occasionally. For what felt like an eternity they remained locked together until Rhea finally pulled back, a strand of saliva still connecting them. Percy, I love you too, Rhea said in such a warm voice that Percy felt as if his heart could start melting as he looked into her beautiful hazel gold eyes. I've already had some time to think about this. How? He asked. A little bird told me, she replied with a shrug. And don't worry who. The point is that they did it for you, and I'm proud that you still came up to tell me yourself, she continued on while cupping his face. And honestly, it doesn't surprise me that your heart is more than big enough to love more than one person. I know your loyalty is important to you, but I would never make you fight your own heart, and if that means I might have to share, then so be it. Percy looked at Rhea in shock, his jaw gone slack as she giggled lightly at his expression. Don't be too surprised. It wasn't too big of a shock if men, especially gods, had more than one significant other back in the times of Greece, though your reasons are far more wholesome. That and I took into consideration our animal natures. What? He asked. Well, you're a wolf and wolf alphas do tend to have several mates, however. She then suddenly jumped him, pushing him onto his back as she straddled him and held his hands at the sides of his head. Remember that I'm a lioness, she said with her fangs suddenly enlarging to become more prominent. He felt his own fangs elongate in response. And as your first mate, I am the queen and will always be at the top, she growled into his ear before nipping it. He growled in response before he turned his head and kissed her with a passion he didn't know he had. She soon released his hand and moved them to his hair, tugging him closer as his hands found her firm rear and gave them an appreciative squeeze. She moaned into his mouth and he took the opening to have his tongue dart into hers, exploring every nook and cranny as her tongue tried to fight back. Soon he sat up before pushing her back so that he was on top, her legs instinctively wrapping around his waist. Gods, I love you, Percy breathed before assaulting her lips again. Me too, Rhea replied between the kisses as her hands traveled over his defined pecs. His hands soon joined in the exploration, one soon cupping her left breast and giving it a firm squeeze, making Rhea moan into his mouth. Soon he willed his coat of darkness to dissipate along with his shirt while he trailed kisses down Ray's neck, her hands pulling his head closer as she mewed softly with his every kiss. He started to near the swell of her breasts and was preparing to slide her dress straps off her shoulders, but then she asked an odd question. So who is it anyways? What? He shot back as he sat up slightly to look her in the face, loving the golden flushed color she had. Who's the other woman you're falling for? She asked again while her fingers kept trailing his abs and lowering teasingly. Ah, he was running blank right now. Okay, Rhea was cool with him loving more than one person, and that made him so happy that he nearly tried looking for a ring just to propose already, but sexy times first. Now however, he had to tell her who the other girl is and that she is in fact her own daughter. Oh boy. Tia, he mumbled too low for her to catch. What? She asked as she brought his head closer. Percy, you're going to have to talk clearly. He stopped again as he blushed in embarrassment. Percy, Rhea growled, getting a little tired of his hesitance. Hestia. He blurted out, making Rhea look at him in surprise. They remained silent for a few minutes, all the while Percy had a radioactive blush going as Rhea stared at him. After what felt like too damn long, Rhea spoke. Oh, that's all. You are being too calm about this. Percy shouted mentally as he waited for her to continue. She just stared at him for even longer, her brow furrowing in deep thought for a while before she locked their gazes and muttered, "Pervert." Ha! Was his intelligent reply as Rhea gave him a frown while crossing her arms and bunching up her bosom. He had to keep his eyes locked with hers, otherwise he'd be distracted again. Pervert, she repeated with a judging look. Asking a mother to share her boyfriend with her daughter. Are you sure this isn't a fetish or something? Percy started choking on air and spluttering as he tried to think of a defense. He didn't just talk to his own heart and ask, hey, mind if we fall for a sweet girl and just so happen add her mother to it? And now she was likely, upset about it. However, his growing concerns were soon turned to confusion as Rhea started giggling while giving him a teasing look. You're not upset? He asked timidly, getting more confused by the moment by his girlfriend. Not really, Rhea said between her giggles. So you approve then? Percy asked with a spark of hope igniting in his chest while Rhea settled down to speak properly. Well, I think we can talk about that later, Rhea said with a shrug. I can't say I don't approve since she is my only child that hasn't become a monster like the rest. Well, Hades too, but he's too grumpy most of the time and a little vengeful, and I'm not really sure what to think about Demeter. A little, she says. Percy mused as he sighed before leaning down and capturing her lips again, but this time in a tender way, expressing his love for her through it. He could feel her smile into it as her arms wrapped around his neck. Have I mentioned how much I love you? He asked as he broke away for a moment. So you keep telling me, Rhea replied before giving him a sultry look. Now show me how much you love me. D.A. Chapter 27. Brothers in Arms 2. Have I mentioned how much I love you? He asked as he broke away for a moment. So you keep telling me, Rhea replied before giving him a sultry look. Now show me how much you love me. To emphasize her point, she started to roll her hips against his, making him suppress a groan at the heat he could feel radiating off her along with the scent of her arousal that his wolf's side could instantly recognize. My pleasure, he growled into her ear, making her shiver in anticipation before he attacked her lips with renewed vigor. He was about to start undressing her again, but then he caught a surprised choke and stumble, making both him and Rhea stop the kiss as they turned their heads to see what it was. Percy's eyes widened in shock as he saw not only his sister, but Jason and Nico standing beside her, all staring at them with equally wide eyes. Hi. Percy asked weakly as he sat up slightly while Rhea let go of his neck. Before anyone could say anything else, he caught a chuckle and everyone in the room turned towards the hall to see Nyx, with Medusa and Lamia right behind her, looking at the scene in amusement, or shock in case of the monster women. Well, it looks like everyone has arrived, she said cheerily. Now onto the impromptu meeting. Several hours earlier. Mom, are you sure? Piper asked uncertainly as the pair walked into a club in the streets of San Francisco. Piper, will you relax? Aphrodite sighed as they looked around the dance floor, techno music blaring through the speakers as lights flashed. But, this is further than what we've done before, Piper returned as she looked at her own dress. It was a tight, black sleeveless dress that hugged her body to expose every curve and ended just below her ass, meaning she couldn't so much as lean too far without showing her panties. Her mom was dressed similar, but instead it was red and her hair was done into curls, while Piper left hers as free as usual and without the trademark feather she always has. Both walked across the floor into the bar, catching many eyes that made her mother preen, while Piper felt more conflicted about it. She liked the attention, certainly more than anything Jason gave her, but also felt a little out of place with the attention coming from others. It's the natural next step, her mom answered as she leaned against the bar, giving the bartender a generous view of cleavage. Besides, you didn't argue all the times I took you to get happy ending massages, she said with a smirk. That's different, Piper replied with a blush. Besides, I didn't actually sleep with anyone, I was just given a lashing of fingers and tongue, Aphrodite finished for her without a hint of shame. Mom, Piper squealed while looking around to see if anyone had heard her mother. It's true, Aphrodite continued while scanning the dance floor. And besides, what's the point of holding out? But I love Jason and my first time should be special, Piper defended while facing the bar, but then looked at her mother when she scoffed. And when will that be? Her mom asked. It's been years and you guys haven't gotten past what? Third base and maybe a little oral. What the Hades is he waiting for? Piper looked at her mother in surprise, wondering where the sudden anger came from. Sure, her mother had been critical of Jason recently, especially after Piper told her her frustrations, but this was new. Aphrodite huffed as she returned to looking at the dance floor. Just another repeat of me and Hephaestus in the making, her mother grumbled while eyeing the cute guys that happened to pass by, and the girls. What do you mean? Piper asked with narrowed eyes. Her mother glanced at her before answering. Ever wonder why I'm with Ares rather than my actual husband? Well, it's simple. He prefers his little toys and trinkets rather than me. I spent decades trying to get his attention, but he hardly noticed. Maybe once or twice when he bothered to bed me to scratch my itch, but that was it. So then I decided that if he wasn't going to pay attention, then I would simply find love somewhere else. But, can being with Ares really be considered love? Piper asked gently, not knowing how to go about this with an angry mother. Better than what it was before, that's for sure, her mom muttered before looking intently at her. But you're on the same path. Sure, Jason might be more attentive than Hephaestus ever was, but in the end he'll choose work over you, so again, why bother waiting? But you don't know that for sure, Piper said in a weak tone, trying to convince herself more than anything. Aphrodite gave a very unladylike snort at that before saying, and yet he already chose remaining mortal and his duty over being happy with eternity with you as a god. Sure, I approved at first just because he included you in his request, but look how that turned out. You're here with me, rather than in the arms of your oh-so-loving boyfriend while he's off playing the knight in shining armor. And why bother anyways? The wars are over, Gaia is gone, and with her the giants could never regain the power they once had, and Kronos is spread so thin he won't reform for millennia, not to mention that our forces are larger and stronger than ever, so why the hell remain to protect a camp capable of doing that for themselves? It's not like there's another war coming or anything. Piper flinched as her mother said that, knowing she was right in part. Jason had chosen duty like a true Roman. She remembered when she had asked him what he wanted to do if they won the war, and his first answer is continuing to serve New Rome by finding and protecting demigods. Only after he noticed that she hadn't exactly gotten too excited with his idea did he add that he would love it if she joined him. Honestly, she just wanted to be done with the whole monsters prophecies living extreme lifestyle, but she'd chosen him for love, but had she made the right choice? Seeing her face, her mom pressed on, you don't want to spend your life waiting around for him, and who knows, maybe he'll rescue some cutie that wasn't claimed until later and have his own fun with her. Jason wouldn't do that. Piper snapped at her mother, but all it got her was a raised eyebrow. I'll leave the track record for the sons of Zeus to point that out, though the original Perseus was the exception to that, but I doubt you'll get that lucky with Jason, Aphrodite added bitterly. Why you really think so? Piper asked as she bordered on tears. Seeing her face, Aphrodite leaned closer and cupped her cheek before speaking in a soothing voice, hey, none of that now. Don't worry about it, okay? You're my favored daughter, one of the heroines of Olympus, you could have any man, god or otherwise, if you wanted. So don't go holding your breath for one cute blonde and live. If Jason shapes up, then great. And if not, no sweat off your back. Now let's turn you into a woman. She finished with a cheer. Her mother's suddenly happy attitude was contagious as Piper rubbed the few tears away before smiling. Her mom was right. She'd faced some of the worst monsters and evil gods to date, why should she be scared of one guy disappointing her? She didn't need to be waiting around for someone that wasn't even really there for her. Time to spread some love, Aphrodite style, her mom said with a wink but suddenly went pale as she held her temple. Mom? Piper asked in concern as she stepped closer. Oh, I'm fine, sweetie, just feeling a little dizzy is all, her mom replied, but Piper persisted. Are you sure? You've been having those headaches for a few hours already today. Maybe I got a bad batch of ambrosia or something, her mother muttered before snapping her fingers. A little necklace with a tiny heart gem attached appeared in her hand. She put it on Piper before she could say anything about it. That's a little something for me to keep track of you. I'm going to my palace and getting something to clear my head, oh. And here, she said as she tapped Piper on the forehead, making her glow pink for a moment. Took away those meddlesome inhibitions of yours, so get a move on. If I don't come back by the time you have some hunk with you, just crush the gem and you'll flash back home. Make sure to use the mist to cover up the teleportation though, ta-ta, her mother said before walking off across the dance floor and out of the club. Piper watched her go before sighing while glancing down at the necklace. Well, I'm already here, so might as well. It's not like Jason will be back early anyways, she thought bitterly before looking across the club and seeing a handsome blonde with the deepest set of blue eyes she'd ever seen. He gave her a grin as their eyes locked on each other and she smiled back shyly. He started walking her way and she couldn't help but lick her lips slightly as she noticed his toned body. Definitely going after this one. D.A. Chapter 28, Brothers in Arms 3. He gave her a grin as their eyes locked on each other and she smiled back shyly. He started walking her way and she couldn't help but lick her lips slightly as she noticed his toned body. Definitely going after this one. A couple of hours later. Andromeda stood shocked at the events unfolding. She'd listened into Jason and Nico's conversation for a good while and had felt suspicious when he said that Piper had been rather tense with him lately. Now that she was close, Andromeda could feel it, the slowly dying love and growing lust. Piper had loved Jason, but it seemed that with the distance and influence of Aphrodite that love had wilted slowly. Her inner rage grew at the love goddess as Andromeda watched helplessly as Jason had his heart broken right in front of him. She felt as if she herself had been struck when his heart broke and could already feel tears building in her eyes. He didn't deserve this, no one did. Were the Olympians so lost in their ways that they even tried to destroy their own heroes just to get what they want? It was clear to her from what she'd heard Jason say before that Zeus had enlisted Apollo to help break him up from Piper. Seeing as she was probably one of his actual reasons for remaining mortal, the possibility of someday passing and going on to Elysium after his duty as a guardian had been finished. Like Percy, they didn't want to lose another of their great heroes, again they were insulted because their offered rewards were rejected, and again their pride escaped them to lead to these tragedies. Just watching all this made Andromeda so angry she wanted to find Aphrodite and skin her alive along with the other heartbreakers. With those thoughts she watched in odd surprise as Jason let loose a lightning-coated fist. It was so sudden Apollo didn't have time to react as the fist met his nose, a satisfying crunching sound following, but Jason wasn't anywhere near done. He let fist after fist fly in an angry rage, Nico standing by silently as he watched while Piper screamed for him to stop. After the 15th blow Jason kicked Apollo in the gut, knocking him back into the villa before he turned around, tears still streaming down his face. They stood in silence, looking between the groaning form of Apollo and Jason. Then, in a voice so broken that Andromeda wanted to run up and hug him, Jason spoke. Get out, I don't want to see you again, Piper McLean. Jason, why? Piper had the gall to ask as she looked at him with red-rimmed eyes. I shouldn't have to even explain my reasoning, spawn of love, Jason retorted harshly without looking back at her. But I need you, and why you need me, she choked out while looking at his back. I won't miss one. Typical. Love. Spawn, Jason replied with clenched fists, but Andromeda could see the pain in his eyes as he said every word, more for himself than anything. Nico. Piper begged as she looked to the silent Ghost King. He didn't deem her worthy of words as he simply shook his head and turned away. Piper started to cry again, but Andromeda wasn't paying attention to her. What she was paying attention to was the recovering Apollo as he wiped some ichor off his lips while glaring at his half-brother's back. Then, in seconds Apollo summoned a golden dagger and rushed for Jason. Andromeda's eyes widened as she watched, knowing that Jason wouldn't react in time, so she made a choice. Dashing forward, she all but materialized between the two as her mist illusion dropped and Jason turned around in surprise along with Nico. Andromeda ignored their looks as she slapped Apollo's wrist, making the dagger veer off as he looked at her in shock. She didn't wait as she used her other hand to smash a fist into Apollo's temple while griping his outstretched wrist so he wouldn't get out of reach. With the sun god stunned, Andromeda let a little vindictiveness slip through as she grabbed a hold of Apollo's shirt. At the same time, her knee shut up, right into his groin, hard enough to lift him several inches off the ground. She caught Jason and Nico hissing in empathetic pain, but she focused more on Apollo's stuck pig squeal. She followed up with a fist to his gut, making him double over before another knee met his face, breaking his nose further. With one last sucker punch, she knocked his ass out, making him drop like a stringless puppet. Silence reigned as the three demigods looked at her in shock, but she didn't have time to answer questions now, so she rushed to Piper, gave her a sharp blow to the head to knock her out as well, and sent a quick prayer to Mnemosyne to clear both their memories to the point she came in. With that, she spun around and grabbed both Jason and Nico's shoulders before they could react and shadow traveled with them out of New Rome. They landed in a sprawling mess of limbs in a park centered in San Francisco, but luckily it was empty at the moment. She quickly detangled herself from them and took a step back as they got up and looked at her wearily. After a few seconds of silence, Nico broke the silence. "Who are you?" he asked as he eyed her up and down while Jason looked for possible escape routes should things go south. She knew both were unarmed, so they were right to be cautious, but she tried to give them a disarming smile while showing she didn't have any weapons in her hands. The bracelet on her wrist though was another matter. "Easy there, I was just trying to help," she said softly. "Why?" Jason asked with narrowed eyes. "And how did you do that to Apollo?" "I threw some serious juice into my punches and all I got out of it was a broken nose and some bruising." "Well, I'm a lot stronger, so it wasn't that hard," she replied honestly, but it didn't seem to make them feel any more secure. "Look, I don't mean either of you harm. In fact, I might even have an offer you might like if you're interested." "An offer?" Nico asked with a quirked eyebrow. "What kind of offer? And why do you think we'd do anything for you? How do we even know if you aren't someone who's after Olympus?" Jason added while his fingers crackled with electricity. "Because I am against Olympus, and after what you just saw, are you really willing to fight on the side of the gods?" Andromeda countered before sighing. "Look, you can come with me and hear me out if you want, or not at all, it's up to you. If not, I'll be going," she said as she half turned to get ready to shadow travel back to the House of Night. "Wait," Nico said before she could leave. "Who are you?" Andy bit her lip as she thought about the reply. She wasn't supposed to reveal herself yet, but maybe it could get Nico and Jason's trust. But, didn't the gods say she died? Then they would think she is a liar and they would attack, which would mean knocking them out and having Mnemosyne clear their memories as well. Taking a leap of faith, she exhaled before facing them fully. "My name is Andromeda Jackson, younger sister of Percy Jackson," she said in a grave voice while Jason and Nico gaped at her. To add some validity to her statement, she willed the disguise she had on to change, revealing her natural hair and eye color to them. "But they said you died," Jason said in a small voice. "She didn't," Nico cut in as he looked at her closely while Jason's gave him a questioning look. Nico glanced at him before explaining. "The gods lied. The Jackson family was murdered by your sister's mistress and Andromeda was kidnapped. However, a few years ago, Andromeda disappeared along with a wolf and girl that had infiltrated the hunt. But that doesn't explain how you're this old now," Nico finished. "I can explain it all somewhere safer. It will only be a matter of time before Apollo comes to and looks for us, or worse, gets help from other Olympians," she said as she noted how the night had only a few hours left and with the day Apollo would be significantly stronger. "Look, you'll just have to trust me and I'll bring you to him." "Him?" both demigods asked at the same time, making Andy smirk. "Why, my brother, of course." DA. Chapter 29. Brothers in Arms IV. Present time. "And that's how we got here," Andromeda finished while glancing around the large table. They all sat together in the dining room table, having discussed everything that's happened in the last several years, decades in case of Percy and his sister, to their newest guests. Nyx and Tartarus, his arrival caused near heart attacks for several, sat at the head of the table. Percy, Rhea, and Andromeda sat to their right side in that order, with Medusa, Lamia, Nico, and Jason sat on the opposite side. Eros, Phanes, and Mnemosyne, a rather short woman with dirty blonde hair and light brown eyes, sat near the other end. It took a while to settle down the demigods and monster women to the point they wouldn't shoot dirty glares at each other. Percy sighed in slight annoyance as he looked at his sister, wondering why she would take such a risk, but in the end it might have tuned out to their advantage. Now Jason knew the full truth since Nico had apparently known but chose to remain silent rather than risk the danger of the gods trying to silence him. Jason had been shocked to the core when they told him and tried to deny it several times, but after Percy, Nyx, and Andromeda taking oaths of honesty, he was forced to believe them. Percy was feeling for him though, especially when he heard about what happened with Piper, and he couldn't help but compare it to what happened with Hercules. It seemed that even the sons of Zeus weren't safe from the scheming and manipulations of the gods. Now he had to ask the question that was on his and Nyx's mind, but would Jason, the ever-loyal Roman, do it? Jason, Nico, Percy started, getting their attention. You have a choice to make now. You can either side with Olympus and we'll wipe your memories before sending you back, you can stay neutral and even seek shelter from us when the time comes, or you can fight with us. Choice is yours. They remained silent for some time, the air tense, before Jason slowly looked at Percy dead in the eyes and asked, so you really did all that? Disowning your father, running away with next to nothing and all before coming down here, without even knowing if you weren't being used? Percy looked back at him intently, seeing the unrest within his brother in arms, before speaking, sometimes you need to take a leap of faith. I might not have had anything to guarantee there weren't ulterior motives, which there were in a way, but at the end of the day, I followed my instincts and what my heart said was right. My true family was murdered or taken from me by those I fought for, and I can't let that fate be repeated to countless more demigods and mortals alike. Someone needed to take a stand, so I did. Jason scrunched his eyebrows in thought while Nico looked down at his own hands, the atmosphere getting oppressively quiet as several sets of eyes watched them intently. After what felt like an eternity, Jason shot up in his chair, making several started, and Medusa reached for her shades by reflex. However, what Jason did next shocked them. I, Jason Grace, renounce all blood ties Zeus, king of the gods, he intoned, and with it a loud thunder crack sealed the oath as he suddenly slumped, looking incredibly tired as he sat back down. Everyone watched silently as the former son of Zeus took a moment to catch his breath before looking directly into Percy's eyes. I fight for family and the Olympians are no family of mine, he said with his now pale blue eyes. Percy cracked him a grin while nodding gratefully before he looked to Nico. The son of Hades looked back at him before speaking evenly, you're against Olympus, not the demigods, right? Yeah, Percy answered while glancing at Nyx. We may want some allies, but we won't force any demigod to pick a side. If they remain neutral, great. If they try to join, we'll allow it under some conditions. And if they oppose us on the battlefield, then they've made their choice and we will face them as any other opponents. Nico looked at him critically as he said that, judging him and his cause. Then, with a faint smile, he nodded. Then I'm in too, but, he said while looking around the table. Let's try to get some of our friends here too. My father and Lady Hestia aren't like the rest of the Olympians and deserve a chance to join or remain neutral in all this. Already in the works, Nyx said in her smooth but commanding voice. But with your help, convincing your father will be far easier. As for Hestia, we'll have to wait until Percy and Andromeda are closer to being full primordial beings, but that shouldn't take long. Can we also try to bring others like Talia, Frank, Hazel, Leo, and Calypso? Jason asked. I can try and sneak into the hunt to visit Talia. She deserves to know the full truth now, Nico added. And got to tell him too. This will help, Tartarus said in his deep voice as Jason and Nico glowed a dark light for a second. At their questioning looks, Tartarus explained. Just a minor blessing. The poisonous air of the pit won't harm you and you're free to use any means of travel in and out of the pit. How does that work with lightning teleportation? Jason asked with a raised eyebrow. Tartarus just shrugged, but Percy could tell he was amused by the idea of it. I can help Jason reach Frank and Hazel undetected, Andromeda offered, making Percy raise an eyebrow at her, but she didn't catch his look. Okay then, there is another I want to try and visit to see if they'll come along, Percy said as he got up. Now let's move on to removing some curses. Medusa and Lamia perked up at that, both eagerly standing along with just about everyone at the table. Huh, well look at that, Nico muttered while eyeing Percy, the commander's up and everyone follows. Geez Percy, ever not in the spotlight. He jabbed, making Percy grin. Hey, when you got it, he replied with a lazy shrug before wrapping an arm around Ray's waist. I can't wait to see the Olympians' faces when they find out Lady Rhea is dating the hero of Olympus, Medusa snickered while Lamia giggled beside her. And I wouldn't have it any other way, Rhea said easily before giving Percy a kiss on the cheek. Well, Jason coughed awkwardly as he glanced at the couple. As much fun as it is seeing the lovebirds flirt, I do believe we have some things to do now, yes. Yeah, Percy agreed, realizing that the couple stuff was probably a sour point for Jason at the moment. So let's head out too. He never got to finish as two bright flashes illuminated the room, making just about everyone have to cover their eyes for a moment, even Medusa with her shades. Once the light died down, they looked to see two new guests standing before them. One was a tall man dressed in a pure white suit and equally white hair cut short, with fair skin and light build. His face was clean shaved, with high cheekbones and intense, sky blue eyes with glowing white pupils. Next to him stood a woman with platinum blonde hair radiating warmth with glowing white eyes, irises and all, dressed in a sky blue pencil skirt, tight, white buttoned shirt with a button or two undone, thigh-high white socks leading to high heels. Together they pulled a very hot CEO and his secretary, look as their skin literally glowed softly. It took Percy a moment to recognize the deities, but when he did, he couldn't help but be curious as to why they suddenly decided to come. They were usually in the palace of the sky with Uranus rather than grace the house of night with their presence. However, it was Nyx who broke the silence as she greeted the arrivals with hugs. Hemera, Ether, how are you? Hello mother, Ether started as he returned a brief hug which Hemera followed sweet. We've come because we thought it was time, Hemera said next while standing beside Ether's side. And that would be? Andromeda asked curiously as she looked at the two protogonoi. Both turned their heads to look at Jason before answering together, to find our heir. DA, Chapter 30, Coming Together To find our heir. Everyone stood stock silent as they looked between Jason and the couple of protogonoi. Percy for his part was rather surprised at the turn of events. For one, he hadn't even been counting on ever adding Jason to their ranks but at least getting him to bow out of the fight. Now not only was he willingly joining but he'd been offered to become an heir for two protogonoi. He thought that was an odd case only for him and his sister. He, because of all the different curses and blessings he'd endured, had strengthened his body to the point it could tolerate the combined power of Erebus and Nyx, twins and second children of Lady Chaos. While rejecting the blood of Poseidon and removing Gaia's power left the necessary space for it, otherwise he could have spontaneously combusted from power overload with just their blessings. His sister was in a similar boat with the minor blessing from Artemis, and the combined domains of Eros and Phanes wasn't necessarily a domain of raw power like many of the other protogonoi. But for Jason to have the potential to absorb the power of day, light, and upper atmosphere without the additional temperament of some curses or major blessings was impressive. That, and it was funny that Uranus didn't come running to claim him first or something. After a few minutes of silence, Jason broke it with a stuttering, what? You heard us, Ether said without missing a beat. We want you to become our heir. So do you accept? Hemera continued with a cute tilt of the head. Jason looked a little overwhelmed to even think about it properly. Luckily Nyx came to his rescue. Okay, hold on for a second. Give the boy a few minutes, he just got here, Nyx said while stepping beside Jason and putting a reassuring hand on his shoulder. Just think on it for a while, maybe even sleep on it. There are already guest rooms prepared for you and Nico, so no rush. She then turned to Percy. While he digests the offer, let's get to Medusa and Lamia. Tartarus, will you help us with this one? Might as well, otherwise you two might take forever, Tartarus muttered as he walked for the exit, completely ignoring the tongue Nyx was sticking out at him. Percy chuckled as he soon followed after with the others filing along to watch. It took a few minutes, but they soon were out in the same courtyard with the familiar white oak tree in the center. He heard their new guests gasp and awe at the sight, making him puff out his chest proudly, only for Rhea to elbow him playfully. He grinned at her before stepping beside Tartarus and Nyx before turning to face Medusa and Lamia as the pair stopped in front of them. Rhea and the others stood off to the side silently as they watched on. Percy then glanced at Nyx to see if she would start things off. She gave him a nod before doing just that while looking at the two monster women. Medusa, before we begin I need you to remove your shades and shawl. She raised her hand before Medusa could protest. You should already know that your curse won't affect a primordial or even a demi-primordial fully. Medusa sighed before nodding as she took off her shades first before slowly removing her shawl to reveal the nest of brown pit vipers that made up her hair. Percy felt the familiar pain course through him, and now he realized why Nyx wanted Tartarus to help. It was so that he could still be a part of lifting the curse to ensure loyalty from both women while also to cover in case Percy loses concentration from the pain. Nyx soon raised her hand, aiming her palm at the women, and Percy mirrored her actions along with Tartarus. Nyx softly counted to 3 before they focused their power into their palms and then shot 3 mixed rays of dark power at Medusa and Lamia. They immediately crumpled to their knees and screamed in agony, but Percy and the others didn't stop. He could actually feel the power of their curses fighting back against him, desperately trying to cling on to the essence of the monster women like parasites. They kept focused though, meticulously flushing out the traces of Olympian energy out of them while also not destroying them in the process. For an hour they stood there, their audience enraptured into the spectacle as Medusa and Lamia's screams grew weaker and weaker. Then, finally the dark energy dissipated from the 2 previously monster women panting on the ground. Percy also buckled to one knee after having spent a far larger amount of power than he had expected. Those curses were dug in tight, he grumbled as he panted, Rhea and Andromeda already at his side looking at him in concern. He sent them a small smile for reassurance as he forced himself to his feet and glanced at Nyx. She had a light sweat but otherwise looked fine, Tartarus looking immaculate as well. He then looked at the women and blushed at the sight. He wasn't sure why or how, but apparently removing curses includes destroying clothes, leaving Medusa and Lamia as bare as the days they were born. He would be lying if he said he didn't appreciate the sight. Medusa's coppery skin with a generous bust, wide hips, and now her dark brown, nearly black hair with glowing green eyes. Lamia as well, with the addition of mile-long human legs complementing her naturally beautiful face and bright blue eyes. He would have kept staring, but Rhea huffed beside him while slapping her hand over his eyes while muttering, "Men." Andromeda giggled to his other side while he just stayed silent. He then heard the ruffle of cloth before Rhea removed her hand, letting him see that both women were now covered in black cloaks provided by Nyx. He glanced to the side and saw Eros chuckling as Jason stared straight up while blushing, and as for Nico, he looked kinda bored. After everyone settled down, Medusa and Lamia looked at themselves before beaming at Percy with tears in their eyes. They soon rushed forward to tackle him into a hug, all the while screaming, "Thank you," over and over again. He chuckled at that before returning a brief hug. Once they got back, Nyx cleared her throat before looking at Medusa and Lamia intently. "Now ladies, just so you know, we didn't remove the curses completely." "What?" Medusa said in surprise, but Nyx raised a hand to keep her quiet before continuing. "The curses have been there for so long that they are practically part of your very essence. We removed enough so that you can control them at will now. Medusa, you can focus on when you want to turn someone to stone and even reverse it if you do by accident, as long as you do it within about 3 minutes, otherwise they're goners. As for Lamia, you won't hunger after children anymore and you can will your legs to change along with retaining all the senses you had before." Medusa and Lamia took a moment to digest that before smiling while nodding. "Now the choice is yours if you want to fight or live peacefully. As you are now, the gods won't be able to find you or even recognize you," Percy added while looking between the pair. Medusa and Lamia glanced at each other before nodding together while looking back at Percy and saying, "We'll fight by your side." "Great," Nyx chirped as she looked at Medusa. "I've been needing someone to teach my fighting style too." "What about me?" Lamia asked while pointing at herself. Nyx hummed while looking her up and down. "I could help train you to be Medusa's partner. You're good with archery, right?" Lamia nodded to that and Nyx smiled back. "Then you'll be trained as a specialized scouting pair. I'll train, and when the time is right, Percy will give you minor blessings to let you shadow travel at will and blend in better with the darkness." "Why me? You could bless them now," Percy questioned as he looked at Nyx. "Because when I pass, so does my blessing," Nyx replied offhandedly. "Oh. So, what now?" Andromeda asked while looking around. "How about some rest?" Rhea asked eagerly. "It's been an eventful day and honestly I think everyone is physically or emotionally tired, so sleep please." Nyx looked like she wanted to argue that, ever the one to get things done quickly even if she wasn't feeling her best, but apparently thought better of it as she nodded. "Fine, go rest." Everyone gave a relieved sigh at that, but Nyx had more to say. "But I expect everyone up early tomorrow. Percy, you have some more chatting to do along with Nico visiting Talia and Jason. You can make a trip to Frank and Hazel after you talk with Hemera and Ether about their offer. As for Medusa and Lamia, well, pray to Lady Chaos because your training starts," she finished with an ominous giggle, making the 2 women gulp nervously. DA. Chapter 31. Coming together too. "But I expect everyone up early tomorrow. Percy, You have some more chatting to do along with Nico visiting Talia and Jason. You can make a trip to Frank and Hazel after you talk with Hemera and Ether about their offer. As for Medusa and Lamia, well, pray to Lady Chaos because your training starts, she finished with an ominous giggle, making the two women gulp nervously. Percy felt for them, he really did, but at the moment he was too tired to offer support. So, he gave Rhea a lazy wink before he wrapped her in his arms and Shadow traveled to their room, leaving a fussy sister behind since they forgot her again. They just liked being a little more cuddly before going to sleep, and it was awkward if Andy was there for it. Sneaking in later when both were asleep already was fine though. So with that, the pair arrived and Rhea snapped her fingers, instantly changing them into their preferred sleepwear, which consisted of only baggy pants for Percy and a shirt and panties for Rhea. They quickly got into the sheets, his arms wrapped protectively around her as she nuzzled into the crook of his neck. She then leaned up to give him a quick kiss before murmuring, "Love you," and then shifting back down so that her head rested on his chest. "Love you too," he returned before kissing the top of her head before slowly closing his eyes and letting the toils of the day lull him to sleep. Next morning. "So, what is your decision?" Ether asked as he sat across from Jason. Percy watched the exchange closely while providing some moral support for his friend. They'd gotten up early like Nyx wanted, and as punishment for sneaking off, Andromeda was forced to join Medusa and Lamia for the first day of training, the physical evaluations. Percy shuddered at the thought, knowing Nyx had less mercy than Tartarus when it came to training. As for Nico, he left to track down the hunt for the day with Rhea going as support in case he gets found. Unlikely since Rhea was a master at using the shadow power granted to her from Nyx's charm to hide her presence and one or two others completely once nighttime fell. As for Percy, Jason asked him to remain since everyone else was gone and he was pretty nervous about the whole thing. Percy agreed easily, and after a slight chewing out from Nyx about procrastinating his search, she agreed as well. Moms, always so pushy, he mused as he waited for Jason to answer Ether. For a few minutes no one spoke until Jason asked softly, "Why me?" Ether's normally schooled expression softened as he glanced at his wife while she in turn gave him an understanding smile as she focused on Jason. "It is because, like Percy, you are a hero that has conquered his flaw and fights for justice, not for his own goals or glory," she said softly. "Conquering my flaw?" Jason parroted as he looked at her questioningly. "Yes," she hummed before explaining, "most children of Zeus suffer from either incredible arrogance or pride. You however have been tempering that pride for years through your own efforts. You grew up from practically nothing in the weakest cohort of the Legion. You grew into a leader but always trusted and respected your friends, making them naturally loyal to you, yet you never took advantage of that. You even conceded the lead of the quest to Percy during the Giant War. You didn't know him personally, you didn't have any reason to trust him with so much authority, and yet, you did. You became brothers through hardship and saved this era. And last of all, you turned down godhood just to keep protecting the fellow demigods you care so much for." Jason remained silent as Hemera spoke of his accomplishments with such respect and admiration, her eyes seemingly glowing brighter with every word. "You're strong, courageous, loyal, and just, while also controlling your own pride for the greater good, even going as far as to denying the glory you could so easily take. After all, for years you've said no to Zeus, constant offers of immortality and riches, but you still remained firm with the choice you made on that day at the end of the war. You're everything Ether and I could hope for in an heir, Jason Grace." "So," Ether took up as he looked straight into Jason's eyes. "Will you become our heir and strive to the better future?" All sets of eyes were on Jason now as he looked down at his own hands for a while. Percy wished he could see what he was thinking, but he kept himself from asking as he silently watched. This was a big decision, and Percy had several days, a war, and several betrayals on his mind when he made his choice, but everything was still rather fresh for Jason, so how would he choose? Suddenly Jason balled his hands into fists as he got up, looking at Hemera and Ether with a fire burning in his eyes. "I'll do it," he spoke firmly, earning a grin from Ether and bright smile from Hemera. "Wonderful." Hemera cheered as the two protogonoi got up and circled around to stand on Jason's sides. "Are you ready?" Ether asked, to which Jason nodded. "This will feel funny," Hemera commented as both protogonoi put a hand on each of Jason's shoulders. Jason was then encompassed in a bright glow, making Percy squint for a moment before it died down and saw the results. Jason stood an inch taller, his muscles more defined yet still lean. His hair had grown slightly from the short military cut to slightly more casual length, also turning a bright, platinum blonde like Hemera with white tips to match ether. His eyes though had gone from a pale blue to glowing sky blue with literal white electricity coursing through the irises and pure white pupils. Ooh, Hemera hummed as she looked at him approvingly. Now the pair of you really are storm and fire. Percy chuckled at Hemera's comparison while Jason inspected himself in a mirror ether conjured up. Not bad, he commented, earning an incredulous look from Hemera. What do you mean? You're going to be a heartbreaker with those looks, Hemera protested, making Jason wince at the heartbreaker part. Oh, sorry. It's okay, Jason sighed as he set the mirror down. Ether then cleared his throat to get their attention. If that is all for now, I think it best you come with us to the Palace of the Sky for now to get familiar with the environment. After all, you need some more light and the pit is a bit lacking in such regards. Percy snorted at that description before asking, so you'll bring him back tomorrow or take him directly to Frank and Hazel's? We could, but didn't your sister want to come along? Hemera returned casually. I suppose, Percy muttered, but he still wasn't that comfortable with his sister being in the mortal world without him or Rhea around. She had a habit of finding trouble since she was his sister after all, and with her current track record, he wouldn't be surprised if they kept getting unexpected arrivals with her every trip. Hey man, don't worry, okay, Jason said reassuringly. I'll keep a guard up and the gods don't really visit them that much from what I hear aside from Hades during the eve of the winter solstice. I'll keep her safe for ya. You do realize she can kick your butt wearing a blindfold, right? Hemera asked while trying and failing to stifle her giggles. Jason blushed in slight embarrassment, but Percy appreciated the gesture. He clapped Jason on the shoulder before giving him the thumbs up. Sure, I'll let her know that you'll return tomorrow to pick her up, but you'd better bring her back the same way she left. Dude, you sound like her dad, Jason muttered while looking at him curiously. Honestly, I feel like it half the time too, Percy said with a shrug. Can you blame me though? I was already 25 when I brought her here at 6 years old. Between me, Rhea, and Nix we raised her, so sometimes I can't help but call her my little girl. And the whole sneaking into yours and Ray's room. I find that a little odd considering she's what, in her 20s now? Jason asked. Power of hers, Percy replied while running a hand through his hair. Like Aphrodite, but instead of appearance she'll change to an age matching the kind of love she feels. In case when she sneaks into our room, she's usually in the form of a 5-year-old, so it's like our daughter sneaking into sleep with her parents or a little sister with her older siblings. That one's my fault, by the way. I kinda spoiled her when she first got here, and letting her sleep in my bed was a big thing with her. Jason chuckled at his explanation before smiling at him. Just sounds like an overly doting big brother to me. Nothing really wrong with that though, so I won't judge or anything, I was just curious. So, Ether muttered as he looked at a watch that Percy didn't recall seeing there before. Are we going or what? Fine, Percy replied with an eye roll while pushing Jason towards the waiting couple. Get going. Some of us have work to do, he added with a smirk. Oh haha, Jason muttered before Hemera grabbed his shoulder and the three flashed away while Percy looked away. He could see the divine forms of God safely now, but until he becomes full primordial, he still needs to look away from any primordial flashing. Once they were gone, Percy sighed as he looked at the empty dining room. Well, off to more business, he mumbled before dissolving into shadow. DA, Chapter 32, Coming Together 3. Nico. ... So they're just over that ridge near the creek, Rhea said with a point. Nico nodded beside her before looking up at the sky. It was still midday and they needed to wait several hours before it would be safe for Nico to shadow travel into the hunt. For now though, Rhea had manipulated the mist to hide them from sight with a tiny barrier in case of a god searching their area. It was unlikely though, since right now Apollo was somewhere in California looking for him and Jason are on Olympus and Artemis only gets on guard at night. My, how things have changed in barely 24 hours, he mused as they settled down in the shade of a sycamore tree and waited out the day. Never would he have thought that he'd be reunited with Percy, by his own missing sister even, and now officially turning his back on Olympus. Sure, he still had to try and convince his father to either side with them or remain neutral, but that in itself could spell a lot of trouble. For one, if Persephone is involved, would she go straight to Olympus and warn her mother? That could be disastrous if the Olympians realized there was a threat too soon. For that reason he'd told Nyx that he planned on waiting until after the last day of summer where Persephone would be trapped in the underworld would be the day he tells his father to run the lowest risk. With that issue on the standby, now he had to focus on Talia and how to go about telling her the truth. He knew things hadn't been easy for her throughout the years since Percy disappeared, and then with the death of Phoebe and Andromeda's kidnapping, things in the hunt have only gotten tenser. Artemis is even crueler to men now, if it were possible, and even new maidens are looked at with suspicion to the point no new prospects have lasted longer than a week before saying that they didn't want to stay. That didn't do anything for the mood of the hunt at all, and even a pin dropping could get a violent response out of them. That could work as a double edge for him. It could be easier to convince Talia, an already difficult feat for someone who is incredibly loyal, but at the same time if he is discovered there is only fighting and running away, no chance of talking things out. Still got to try and hope for the best, he thought as he allowed his eyes to close as he relaxed. He knew Rhea wouldn't let her guard down when near the hunt and would react if anything dangerous came by, so he felt relatively at ease to get some rest. His last sight before he passed into the realm of Morpheus was Rhea sitting comfortably against another tree opposite him while weaving some blades of grass. He didn't know how long he'd slept, but when Rhea shook him awake he started slightly before looking around. It was well into the night and the stars were out, creating larger shadows all around as the atmosphere became nice and cool. He glanced at Rhea to see her looking at the ridge again before she said, "The goddess left for her chariot an hour ago. Use the opening to get to Talia's tent. I'll cast a silencing spell over it so don't worry about getting loud." "Okay," he replied softly before willing the shadows to envelop him. In just a few seconds he materialized near a familiar presence, and a silver knife at his throat. He didn't move as his eyes rolled to the side, meeting a pair of electric blue eyes looking at him intently. "Hi," he said weakly, still feeling the fine edge barely grazing his throat. Talia kept staring for a few seconds before she sighed while lowering the knife. "What are you doing here, Nico?" she asked as she plopped down on her bed. Nico would have done the same but knew Talia was tense, and about to get more so he kept his distance for his own safety. Also, only now did he notice the state of her dress, or more like undress. Black panties and overly tight shirt displaying an impressive bosom for a 15-year-old, but then again it was him and Talia didn't usually care if she was seen like this. He waited for a few tense seconds before trying to break the ice. "Talia," he said softly, making her look up at him. "I need to tell you something big." "What?" Talia asked curiously as she leaned forward. "Just, don't freak out and let me finish before you say anything," he started before going on. He told her everything, from the week Percy disappeared and how his father told him the gods' plans and what they did to Percy's family to finding Piper cheating on Jason with Apollo. Every detail he knew he covered, giving nothing but the whole truth. When he finally finished, several hours had passed, letting himself sit down on the floor after releasing a tired sigh. He looked at Talia, who was stock still and extremely pale as she looked down at her own trembling hands. He could see the levels of pain and betrayal passing through her eyes with every revelation, especially the painful ones about Artemis. Sally had been like the mother none of them had when they visited with Percy, and the news of her death had been especially hard for Talia. He knew she'd tried her best to turn a blind eye to the cruelty of the hunt in their treatment of men. To try and fit into a family that had changed from what it was when she originally joined, or maybe it always was that way and she didn't fully realize it. Like Jason, he knew Talia wouldn't be able to make a decision right now, so he slowly got up and gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "I know this is a lot to take in right now, Thal, so don't try to decide anything, just sleep on it," he said as he reached into his pocket and pulled out a familiar black marble. He placed it in one of her hands before slowly closing it, his hands cupping hers together. "If you do decide you want to leave, crush the marble and it will take you to us," he instructed before taking a step back. "Are you leaving now?" she asked weakly as she looked at him with trembling eyes. "You know I would love to stay, but it's too dangerous for me or any male here," he returned while giving her a sad smile. "But you know I'm never that far, and your family, your real family, will always have your back even if you don't want to fight. It's merely up to you." With those final words he dissolved into the shadows, leaving his cousin to settle her own thoughts. He knew if anyone could get through this, it would be her. She had the resilience for it and would always come back stronger, but in the end, she needed to decide on her own for herself. Fight for the side of the Olympians full hypocrisy and deceit, or turn traitor and fight with the family that has actually been there by her side. A soft breeze passed through a large island, the trees swaying slightly with it as the night sky remained clear. On a sandy beach the shadows writhed and crawled to one point before condensing into one figure, soon dispersing to reveal Percy. He glanced around before sighing as he stretched his back, earning some satisfying cracks making him groan. Man, took forever to find this damn island, he grumbled as he looked up at the beach and towards a path leading into the island's forest. Well, hopefully the little archers aren't monitoring the island right now even if the moon is up. He was on Delos, one of the fabled lost islands of Greek mythology. Unlike Ogygia, which had a curse meant to only deter mortals from finding it and prevent heroes from ever visiting more than once, Delos could only be reached by a god who's set foot there before. Otherwise they have to search for it the old-fashioned way, like Percy had for several hours, and the clincher, the damn island moved. He'd practically covered every inch of the Mare Nostrum while trying to feel out the strong magical presence of Delos. Turns out this time it was parked out near the Turkish peninsula. Percy quickly went up to the forest and walked through the dirt path, letting him observe the lush forest filled with the sounds of insects and some game. It took him a few minutes until he arrived to a clearing in the island and looked across it. He spotted two figures sitting near a fire speaking to each other softly while sipping what looked like tea. He quietly walked to them, his hood pulled up to hide his features even though neither of these two knew him personally. Soon enough he was close enough that he stopped and cleared his throat to get their attention. They both snapped their heads to look at him in surprise, jumping up while one of the women drew a dagger from her waist while the other stepped back. He raised his hands while speaking softly. Peace. I've only come to talk. Neither looked particularly at ease with that but he shrugged it off as he lowered his arms while taking in their appearances. One was fair-skinned with auburn hair and dark blue eyes, dressed in a Greek chiton that reached just past her knees. The other one with the knife had black hair and strikingly amber eyes, her nearly mocha skin adding even more contrast to her eyes. She was dressed slightly more modern, with a green, spaghetti-strap dress and casual sandals. One was Leto, Titaness of motherhood, and mother of the twins. The other with the dagger was the original Phoebe, Titaness of bright intellect and prophecy. Who are you? Phoebe asked suspiciously while aiming her dagger at him. One who comes with an offer, and a warning, Percy replied gravely while his eyes glowed brightly under his hood making both Titans shuffle nervously. Percy let the silence hang around for a moment before speaking softly. Phoebe, I come with an offer for you. I am in need of someone who has a link to foresight and not allied with the gods. You're against Olympus? Phoebe asked in surprise while Leto narrowed her eyes. A mere demigod with an eye trick. Ha! You might as well either turn yourself in already or crawl back into whatever pit you came from. Oh the irony. What makes you any different than my foolish siblings or the giants? They've already failed again and probably won't get any more chances in the next millennia. Face it, the Olympians are here to stay, Phoebe finished bitterly. Oh I wouldn't be too sure of that, Percy replied with a slight chuckle. They're losing heroes left and right by their own doings and it will only be a matter of time. Who are you? Leto asked this time as she eyed him intensely. If by chance you meet your daughter, tell her Umbra says hi, he replied but then noticed that Leto winced slightly. My children, don't really visit anymore, she murmured softly while tugging at her chiton. But aren't you free? Percy asked with a frown. He was sure that he specified Leto during his request since he learned more about her when their quest stopped near the old temple of Delphi and he got more familiar with the history of the twins. I am, she replied softly. But, Olympus has changed much and just because we were freed thanks to that Jackson boy didn't mean we were treated any better. Most of the few freed titans and their children usually returned to the very places they were kept or moved somewhere away from Olympus. I returned here along with Phoebe. And your children? Percy asked with a deepening frown. I guess they grew up too much to need their mother and her constant nagging, Leto said with a smile devoid of warmth. Nagging as in you've been telling them to be more faithful or simply stop whoring around for your son, especially given he's no longer single, and trying to be more lenient with men for your daughter, Percy stated, seeing Leto slouch slightly confirming it for him. Artemis actually snapped at me for the first time about 3 years after I was freed and now she's so angry, Leto said softly as tears gathered in her eyes. Apollo stopped wanting to spend any time with me after the first few months until his visits stopped altogether just over a year ago, she said as she sniffed slightly. They've changed so much from my 2 babies that I birthed and raised here. Now they're just their father's children. By now Leto was crying softly as Phoebe gave her a comforting hug. Percy watched the pair sadly, shaking his head softly in disappointment. He knew the Olympians had fallen far with their pride filled with their victories and godly superiority being the anchors, but this was just low. To shrug off their freshly released mother, who cared and nurtured them while risking the wrath of the Queen of the Gods, was sad. Hell, He was pretty sure that aside from Hestia and possibly Hades, the remainder of the elder Olympians hadn't thought about their own mother in centuries. He sighed at the sight before him before clearing his throat to get their attention. Once he had it, he spoke again. I can understand how you are feeling, Leto, but I must ask, would their treatment for you mean that you're willing to go against them? He asked. Leto looked unsurely at him, but he could see the hesitance to fight her own children while Phoebe narrowed her eyes. He nodded before continuing, I expected as much. Then I offer you a chance at neutrality for the coming war and even refuge should the Olympians try to bring you into their forces. As for Phoebe, I have an offer that I would discuss somewhere more secure, and know that, should you decide it, I will return you here and leave you alone. I swear it on the sticks. Thunder boomed, signaling the sealing of the oath as both titans glanced at each other. Then Phoebe spoke hesitantly. If I were to join you, what of my husband? She asked wearily. Koyo's correct. Titan of intellect and axis of heavenly bodies, Percy said, getting a nod from Phoebe. If I recall correctly, he was neutral the first Titan war and then sided with Kronos in the second and was defeated in Mount Othrys with Krios by the Romans. Well, should he choose in the coming war, I would offer him neutrality or even a place among my forces. His domain is powerful and he could be an indispensable tactician. But he's in Tartarus right now and won't reform for centuries at least, Phoebe shot back. I wouldn't count on that, Percy said in a low tone. I said war is coming, but never that it was only two sides. Both Leto and Phoebe's eyes widened as they looked at him, their thoughts racing with the implications of his words. So, he started while raising an open hand for them to take. Are you coming or what? D.A. Chapter 33. Goodbye I. Wow, this area is nice, Andromeda commented as she looked around the heavily wooded mountains. Yeah, Jason agreed as he occasionally glanced at the scenery. They were walking along a gravel and dirt road close to the apex of a mountain valley with large trees surrounding them. An odd deer or so passed by them time to time, but otherwise it was very quiet, the afternoon sun already on its descent for the day. While walking, Andy kept glancing at the air of the light beside her, a worried frown marring her face at times. Ever since she'd brought Jason to the House of Night and everything that happened afterwards, she could feel the lingering pain in his heart. It could only be described as sad and empty, even, as if he'd given up on the entire concept of love. She wondered if this was what her brother had felt in his betrayal, but then she shook her head. True, he'd suffered similar betrayals, but each happened between periods of battle and then peace, with at least one thing holding him together. Annabeth cheated, but he had his friends and concerned with the war. Later it was the gods and the murder of their mom, but Percy had Hestia's companionship for a time and then Nyx and Rhea. Everything had simply fallen apart for Jason in one night, and now, though he hid it a little too well, he was suffering as well with nowhere to vent those emotions. Maybe he would confide in Percy or Nico, but then again, Nico was odd with emotional stuff and Percy, while being Jason's bro, was still a klutz when it came to comforting people. She should know, half the time when she cried for the first few years about everything she learned, Percy would mess up what he was trying to say. Thank goodness she could be calmed with his hugs and cookies while Rhea handled the talking things out. But who did Jason have for that? Reyna. Not likely, and she was back at the camp anyways. His sister could be an option, but they weren't even sure if she'd join them. Calypso too, but then again, it went down to the lines being drawn for the war. Could I help out? She wondered as she glanced at him again, staring slightly at his sky blue eyes coursing with white electricity and glowing pupils. He really does look nice like this, she noted before looking away and shaking those thoughts for the moment. Come on. Just think of some way to start, but how? It's too soon, but he'll just wallow in sadness otherwise. Arg. She huffed in frustration, which earned his attention, making her bite back a curse. Still, might as well strike while the iron is hot anyways. Ah, Jason, she started as she locked eyes with him. Yes. How are you feeling? She asked tentatively, but he gave her a confused eyebrow so she elaborated. You know, about what happened in the camp. At the mention of the camp, his eyes immediately darkened with a flash of pain, almost making Andy flinch as she literally felt it pass through her as well. After some tense silence, he answered curtly, I'm fine. She nodded slowly, knowing that he wasn't in the mood to continue the conversation, and now she was beating herself up for bringing it up. They walked on, the atmosphere now awkward when all Andromeda had wanted to do was talk with him and get to know him. Now she was pretty sure she made a sloppy attempt at breaking the ice, and possibly added more to it. Still, she was Andromeda Jackson, younger sister of the infamous Percy Jackson, and that meant being stubborn was in the job description, just with a little more tact than her brother. So she took a breath as she looked at him before speaking softly. I know you don't want to talk about it, she started while Jason kept looking forward without giving any sign that he'd heard her. But I just want you to know, if you do ever want to talk, I'm just a shadow hop away. He didn't answer her as they continued to walk, making her look at the floor dejectedly. She kicked around a twig or two as they moved, the silence feeling like a lead weight on her shoulders. After a while she looked around again as they passed a ridge and she could see the lower end of the valley. Evergreens and pines covered the mountain floor while a large lake marked the center and some of the highest peaks actually had snow on them even though the summer hadn't even ended yet. She found it both beautiful and peaceful, much like some of the forests she used to explore whenever the hunt located in a new area, until she left that is. That was probably the only thing she truly regretted about living in the House of Night. Sure, the house was more like a palace and was structured beautifully along with the special courtyard Percy and Nyx formed together but was still Tartarus. She couldn't wait for the day she could live on the surface again peacefully and just enjoy nature as she once had. It was while thinking all this and taking in the view that she failed to notice Jason stepping up beside her before speaking softly. So soft in fact that she almost missed it. Thank you. She spun her head around in surprise but he was already moving again but from what she caught of his face before he was too far in front for her to see, she noted that he had a slightly embarrassed blush. She smiled at the tiny victory though, knowing it was hard for guys like her brother and Jason to admit feeling weak or down. They were the leaders, the ones everyone looked to in times of need. They were tempered to not show any weakness or pain, to be those intimidating and unyielding warriors, the commanders that could take more and keep going. So for Jason to even thank her for her offer made her feel giddy to the point she actually hopped a little. She soon caught up to him though, a pleasant silence now surrounding them as she hummed softly to herself. She could even see how Jason looked more relaxed and had the faintest of smiles on his face. After some more walking she let her curiosity take over as she looked at Jason. So, why did Frank and Hazel come out here of all places? Jason glanced at her for a moment before answering. Well, I guess they just wanted to get away from it all. I mean, can you really blame them? The war took a heavy toll on everyone, especially those that had to travel to the old world. Many of us had to face our demons one way or another so, once everything was said and done, trying to find peace made the most sense. Yeah but with the barrier Hecate set up, they could have lived just about anywhere so why out here in upper state Washington near the border to Canada? She persisted. Frank's Canadian, Jason answered as if it explained everything before frowning. And I thought we weren't supposed to name gods who are sided with the Olympians to not risk being found too early. Who said Hecate is with the Olympians? She said slyly while Jason looked at her incredulously. What? Percy's been busy these last few years and honestly, of the gods, Hecate owed Percy more than anything since he's the reason she was spared after the Titan War and her children were recognized. The minute he told her his plans and who he is, she was on board. Oh, was Jason's only reply before he asked, any other gods I should know about? A few like Damison, she answered with a shrug. The bane of the war god. But I thought he hated his father after his banishment to Tartarus, Jason said with a frown. Not Tartarus, Gaia, Andromeda corrected. And for the record, he knew that it was his mother that was disappointed in him while Tartarus lost interest in any of the giants after they were defeated thanks to their own arrogance. Cold, Jason muttered. True but many forget that Tartarus is also wise and expects as much from those he trains or rarely sires. The giants were supposed to be a better solution to the Olympians after they showed their true colors after a few centuries of ruling but in the end, the giants failed. Tartarus can be fair and even lenient with one failure, but to fail so utterly and not even for a good reason was too much for him to even look at the giants again without feeling shame for how they turned out. As for Damison, since it was Gaia's curse that kept him trapped within the pit, Tartarus couldn't really do anything to help, not that he would have considering Damison gave up pretty quick and accepted his punishment without much of a fight. And now? Jason asked curiously. He still won't fight on the front lines if that's what you're asking, Andy answered as she absent-mindedly kicked a small pebble. However, Percy got Damison to a compromise that would benefit both parties so there's that. Huh, Jason muttered as they finally spotted a house coming onto view resting on the end of a ridge below the shadow of a mountain. Andromeda looked at it intently, subconsciously picking out any weak points of defense and what best ways to possibly defend or attack that house. It was two-story, fashioned out of a stone base before transitioning into thick logs and slanted roof. There was a large window stretching from floor to possibly the second floor letting Andy see into the living room and dining room beyond. That might be a serious safety issue, she mused before returning to her observations. The gravel road led to a stone driveway and large garage currently open, letting Andy see a Jeep Wrangler, a pair of dirt bikes, and a Honda CR-V all parked inside. She also noted the pair of legs sticking out from under the Jeep with several tools thrown around. Jason chuckled beside her as he walked onto the garage, suddenly whistling a happy tune as they got closer. Soon enough the pair of legs went stiff for a moment before a lot of scrambling followed as whoever was under the car rushed to get out. Andy was surprised a little as a woman looking 25 jumped up before them, wearing overalls, a long-sleeve shirt caked in dust and car grime, coarse brown hair held back by a gold bandana, and a pair of warm amber gold eyes looking at them. The moment her eyes landed on Jason she grinned before giving him a flying hug while shouting, "Jason!" which he caught expertly. This must have been a usual Andromeda thought with a small giggle before the woman looked in her direction. "Hello there," she greeted kindly. "I'm Havel Jong, and you are?" "Andromeda Jackson," she replied without missing a beat and internally chuckling at Hazel's face at hearing her name. "I know. Supposed to be dead and all that, plus I should be like 10 by your time, but we'll get to that." "Okay," Hazel said unsurely before looking to Jason for explanation, although she paused as she narrowed her eyes and properly studied him before gasping. "What happened to you? You look so different." "Let's get frank too before I explain anything," he said before a slight frown marred his face. "A lot of things have happened in the last few days, so this will take a while." "And Piper?" Hazel asked as she looked around for said daughter of Aphrodite. "I take it this is more than a casual stop on one of your trips to rescue demigods." She missed Jason's grimace, but he didn't let it show for long before sighing. "Let's just go inside first." DA. Chapter 34. Goodbye too. "Let's get frank too before I explain anything," he said before a slight frown marred his face. "A lot of things have happened in the last few days, so this will take a while." "And Piper?" Hazel asked as she looked around for said daughter of Aphrodite. "I take it this is more than a casual stop on one of your trips to rescue demigods." She missed Jason's grimace, but he didn't let it show for long before sighing. "Let's just go inside first." Hazel gave him a worried look before nodding, picking up a rag to clean her hands along the way as they went to a door inside the garage and leading into the house. As soon as they entered, Andromeda could smell dinner cooking and she couldn't help but drool slightly. Whatever it was, it definitely involved barbecue judging by the smell. They walked into a rather stylish kitchen and adjoining dinner table separated by a long island with a few utensils, cookbooks, and a small basket filled with fresh breads. The insides were fashioned from a finer wood for the table, chairs, kitchen cabinets, and floor, while the kitchen top was granite with a gas-burning stove. Andy glanced to the side to see a similar living room with a currently burning fireplace making the atmosphere nice and toasty. She then looked back into the kitchen and spotted Hazel's husband, Frank Jong, currently tossing a salad while wearing an apron that said, "Big Boy Eats" on it, making her chuckle. The noise was enough to get his attention and allowed Andromeda to get a good look at him. He stood as tall as her brother at 6'4", with a bulkier build and neck like a bull. Dark brown, nearly black eyes looked at them in slight surprise before he gave a huge grin as he set the salad bowl down. He quickly got around the island before giving Jason a bear hug to end all hugs. She was pretty sure she even heard Jason's spine crack from it while she and Hazel giggled at the face he was making. Soon enough Frank set Jason down before looking at her. "Hello there, Frank Jong," he introduced while offering a handshake which she graciously accepted. "And you are?" "Andromeda Jackson," she replied, smirking again at his predictable reaction at hearing her name. "I know, I'll explain in a moment." "There's a lot to explain though," Jason added seriously as Frank got a proper look at him and had the same face as Hazel when she noticed his changes. "A lot is right," Frank muttered before turning back to the kitchen, Andy following his line of sight to see several pots stewing on the stovetop. "But, you know the rules of the house." "But, no buts, Grace," Frank interrupted while crossing his arms. "We get visitors, we have a proper dinner and then talk about business." Jason stared at him for a few seconds before sighing in defeat. "Fine, I can't get you to change your mind anyways, stubborn shapeshifter." Frank grinned at him before clapping Jason on the shoulder. "Great. Then help me set up the table and we'll open up some cold ones while Hazel gets cleaned up. Andromeda, you're free to join us, or if you're of the finer tastes, I can bring out some wine." "That sounds lovely," Andy agreed as the group split up to do just that. It didn't take long for Hazel to return, dressed in a simple cream dress reaching her knees and her hair set free. They soon got to dinner, a lovely meal of Mongolian bibik, stir-fry, and the salad. Throughout the meal Andromeda couldn't help but constantly smile at the warmth and openness the Jongs displayed, making Jason smile and laugh. She could feel the love in this home, between Hazel and Frank as a happy couple and then Jason with the pair as siblings with bonds forged through hardship. I wish I could have seen what the original seven were like before everything broke apart, she thought sadly as she looked at their smiling faces. But maybe someday they could return to this, after their war was finished, even if the original seven would probably never be gathered again. She kept her thoughts on the matter to herself though as the dinner concluded before they transitioned to the living room, the couple sharing a loveseat while Andy and Jason sat on a couch facing them. So, Hazel started, what did you come to talk to us about? Jason and Andromeda shared an uneasy glance before looking at the couple again, the tension building by the second. Jason, Hazel said in a worried tone as she looked between the two. What's going on? Jason sighed before speaking softly, it's a long story. And so, they told them. Everything starting with the murder of Percy's parents and the intentions of the gods to what happened just a few days ago without necessarily mentioning which immortals were already allied with them. Hazel had cried faintly when she heard about the incident with Piper and gave Jason a brief hug, but they had to continue on soon. After hours they sat silent, Andromeda staring at her feet nervously as she waited for the couple sitting across from them to say something, anything. After what felt like an eternity Frank sighed, making the other three look at him. So, he started in a thick voice, as if there was something in his throat. What is it that you came to accomplish? I know there had to be more than just coming to tell us this stuff. Hell, Nico knew and could have come any time, so why now? Jason ran a hand through his hair before answering, honestly, nothing. At their confused expressions he continued on. I don't want anything from you two. I don't even want you to be involved in this coming war. You've done your part, you've already saved this world once and that is enough. I know you're both loyal Romans at heart, but please, Jason said pleadingly. Don't fight this time around, I don't know if I could bear the thought of having to fight either of you. Frank and Hazel stared at him in shock as Jason actually got on his knees and bowed to them, his voice coming out choked, please, I don't want to lose any more family to war. Jason, Hazel said as tears built up in her eyes as she got down and hugged him to her chest as the Exon of Zeus sobbed softly while embracing her back, all the pain and inner turmoil from the last 2 days finally catching up to him. Frank soon joined in, engulfing both in his massive arms protectively. Andromeda for her part had tears running down her cheeks as she watched this union of friends, of family. This was the kind of love that she wished to protect and nurture, especially when tough times were approaching. Just in the few hours she'd gotten to know these two heroes, she'd already grown to love them and wish that they lived out the rest of their partially immortal lives in peace. After several minutes Jason calmed down enough to pull back slightly and look at Hazel. She gave him a soft smile as she wiped away the last of his tears before kissing him on the forehead. Don't worry, she said gently as she looked at him. We won't fight this time around. You won't? Jason asked hopefully as he looked between the two. No, there would be too much at stake now, Frank replied as he wrapped an arm around Hazel, his hand resting right over her belly. It took Andromeda a moment before her eyes widened in understanding, suddenly realizing that Hazel never once touched an ounce of alcohol throughout the night and even had a slight bump that had been well hidden by her dress. Hazel Yoer, Jason trailed off as he numbly pointed a finger at her as she blushed while smiling. We're expecting. Frank and Hazel said gleefully, making Jason suddenly crack a smile bright enough to make Apollo flinch. That's incredible. He shouted as he shot up and picked up Hazel before giving her a tight hug while Frank laughed and Andy even got up to join the hug, too giddy to resist. She was pleasantly surprised to feel Hazel bring her into it before Frank again engulfed them all together and actually picked them up. After the hug Jason stepped back while looking relieved at the couple. So how far along are you? Andy asked excitedly. 2 months, Hazel replied while Jason clapped Frank on the shoulder and told him good job with a wink, making the huge man blush up a storm. Hazel noticed and giggled for a moment before she cleared her throat to get Jason's attention. So Jason, now that you know and all, me and Frank wanted to ask you something. What? Jason asked curiously as he looked between the couple. Well, we were wondering if, Frank started but Hazel beat him to it. If you'd want to be the godfather? She asked anxiously. Jason looked at them, stunned beyond words for a minute at least before he smiled even brighter and hugged Hazel again while shouting, of course. I'd be honored. DA, Chapter 35, Goodbye 3. If you'd want to be the godfather. She asked anxiously. Jason looked at them, stunned beyond words for a minute at least before he smiled even brighter and hugged Hazel again while shouting, "Of course. I'd be honored." There was a little cheer for that as the mood in the house skyrocketed. They spent another couple of hours like that, talking happily and telling Andy all sorts of stories from their adventures as demigods until the hour got late. Andy glanced out into the pitch-black night. "Looks like it's time to head out," she murmured sadly, but Hazel put a comforting hand on her shoulder. "Well, I hope you know you are always welcome here," she said warmly, making Andy nod happily. "And you better let us know when the special day comes," Andy said while pointing at her tiny bump. "We'll all want to be there for that day. I'll even make sure my brother comes along." "But won't it be dangerous if the gods spotted him or sensed him near?" she asked, but Jason answered for her. "I could always speak to Ether and see if he'd be okay bringing you into the palace of the sky for that day so all of us can be there for you," he offered, making Frank and Hazel's jaws drop. "Yeah, and hopefully Nico will have spoken to your father about us and he could make up some story about bringing you into the underworld for the birth too," she added with a wink. "Are you sure?" Frank asked nervously. "Wouldn't the gods find it odd?" "Maybe, but it's not like they're on good terms with Hazel's dad anyways after what they did years ago," Andy answered with a shrug. "And if not, we'll figure something out." "Thank you," Frank said as he draped an arm around his wife. "Our pleasure," she replied as Jason stood beside her. "Oh, and if you want to contact us, pray to Nyx, Rhea, Mnemosyne, Ether, Hemera, or Taratrus." She paused for a moment before adding. "And if you just want to send a letter or message, write on a piece of paper and stick it into a shadow while praying to Nyx or even Percy. One of them will get it immediately." "I just learned that it works with light too," Jason pipped up. "Same thing, stick a letter in clear daylight and pray to Hemera or Ether and they'll get it. I'm not connected to the domains since I haven't claimed the right to be an heir, so I can't receive messages that way yet." "Noted," Frank said with a nod before there were several goodbye hugs. Soon enough both were stepping out of the house, the happy couple looking at them with warm smiles. Andromeda gave them a wave before looking at Jason. "So, does Ether expect you back yet?" she asked. "I'm good for another few hours," he replied easily. "Then you're hanging out with me," she said as she snagged his arm before shadow traveling them back to Tartarus. They stumbled a little, or more like Jason did, and she caught him, making him blush. It was odd, considering his blood was slowly turning to ichor, so he was a reddish gold. She giggled at it though, but stopped when she heard a throat being cleared. She turned to see her brother looking at them in amusement, sweat trailing down his exposed torso as his swords Sin and Purgatory rested at his sides. She glanced around and realized she'd jumped them to the training grounds by accident in her haste. She looked across from Percy to see Rhea there as well, dressed in a tight-fitting sports bra and yoga pants, her hair in a ponytail, and also gleaming with sweat. In her hands was her bow staff, Testament, made of a mix of black Tartarian steel and emerald that she used her earth domain to obtain. The entire staff was just about 7 feet long, with the main rod made of the steel while the emerald covered the blunt ends and formed tendril patterns reaching towards the center with the leather grips. She was broken out of her musings when Percy snapped his fingers to get her attention. "Sup sis, how was the trip?" he asked. Andromeda glanced at Jason before both beamed at Percy and told him everything. By the end Rhea was hoping with excitement at the news of a baby on the way. "Oh, we are so visiting them soon," Percy agreed as he set a hand on his girlfriend's shoulder to calm her down slightly. "How soon?" Rhea asked eagerly. "Don't worry love, soon enough," Percy answered with a chuckle before his head randomly tilted to the side as if he was listening to something before a sly smile appeared on his face. He then glanced at Jason and said, "I do believe you have some siblings on the way." Before they could even ask, Percy smirked before dissolving into shadows while Rhea had a knowing smile on her face. "Do you know what he's talking about?" Jason asked as he looked at Rhea. "It's a surprise," she replied with a wink before turning around and heading for the House of Night in the distance. "Let's get to the house, we are expecting company after all." Talia Pav. Talia sat silently in her tent, her thoughts racing as she looked down at her own hands for what felt like hours. It had been little more than a day since Nico came and revealed the truth to her. She hadn't been able to sleep since and couldn't so much as look Artemis in the face throughout the whole day. She didn't know what to do anymore and she'd never felt more alone in her life. Here she was, with the band of girls that were her supposed family, only to learn of the horrors that had been hidden here. Sure, she'd known that after the war something had seemed to change within her mistress and even the other gods on the rare occasions they visited. It was as if now that the threats of their own ends weren't there, they no longer needed to pretend to be amiable or respectful towards the demigods. Apollo and Artemis argued louder and harsher words were spit out. Hermes, who usually at least said hi to his daughters in the hunt during deliveries, simply appeared, finished business and left. They didn't say anything, but she could tell some of his daughters felt hurt about it, him being one of the only males they still cared about. She also hadn't spoken to her own father in years after one odd visit with him asking her if she would consider leaving the hunt to become a goddess on Olympus. She denied it without hesitation, at the time feeling sure that her place was here rather than on Olympus, and she couldn't shake the feeling that godly politics would be involved if she did. Hell, just look what happened to her so-called friend, Annabeth. The pair had long since drifted apart, especially when Talia learned about the cheating on Percy with Apollo of all people, and the irony that followed. She wasn't sure how or why it happened, but a year or so after Percy's disappearance, Zeus announced that Apollo and Annabeth were getting hitched. She remembered the wedding as a blur, since just about everyone from Camp Halfblood and the hunt had to attend along with a few senators from New Rome. She'd been sorta happy for Annabeth, but they just weren't close anymore and the friendship was at an end. She still felt some pity though when, surprise, surprise. Took a year, impressive enough honestly, but soon Apollo was caught having an affair with a mortal and had another bun in the oven, confirmed by Hestia, Artemis informed her at the time. Apparently Annabeth nearly went full Hera on the mortal, but luckily Hestia put her foot down about harming innocent mortals or demigods. That was another thing. The few times she'd visited Olympus in the years, Talia had heard how Hestia is nearly silent at all meetings now and doesn't even try to stop her brothers from fighting. She only ever speaks up when something regarding a demigod is mentioned, and usually only to prevent hasty actions. So Olympus was a mess ever since Percy left, and she was pretty sure she didn't even know the half of it, but now she could understand why. Hestia and Hades being reluctant to even take part, the louder bickering and threats sent between the gods, and the dramas revolving around them and the demigods. Apparently now her own brother could be added to the list of vanishing demigods, which made her wonder how New Rome would react. Their guardian and Pontifex Maximus, one of the seven, gone without a trace just like Percy nearly 9 years ago. Add to that the mysterious disappearances of other gods and the wolf, no, Percy's infiltration while recovering his sister. He'd been so close and yet she'd never known until now. She could still recall the few times he simply sat beside her and offered silent comfort on her down days, or when she occasionally scratched him behind the ears. He'd been such a welcome presence then, and now she had the chance to have it again along with her family. Andromeda, Nico, Jason, and Percy were all waiting to see if she would join them, and in her hands was the marble keeping her from them. But then what about the hunt? She knew that Percy was the one to kill Phoebe and would likely want the entire hunt to burn for what they did to his family and the crimes committed over the years. That had been her first sign that things were wrong with Artemis and the other gods. They were reverting, becoming far more like their myths, just as merciless, cruel, and abusive. Artemis had once been like a sister or even mom to them, more so in Talia's case since they actually are sisters, but things had fallen apart. Her sister had changed from the once noble Olympian that helped spare Percy after he saved her. But on the inside she'd been boiling with rage at having a debt to anyone, especially a male. Just like her, many of the gods were starting to feel belittled and insulted to have one demigod not only save them repeatedly but also made them change their ways when most clearly didn't want to. He had been an upstart, a change, a guide and role model for the next generation of demigods, and that was dangerous to millennia-old beings set in their ways. It made sense that they would want him either leashed by the ancient laws as a god with them, or disposed of. So is that what's happening to me? She wondered as she thought about her father's request and the slow separation she was feeling from the hunt. In time her attitude towards men had become increasingly apparent, as she did not outright show hostility towards them until they gave her a reason to. It also wasn't a secret that she would often go to nearby streams when they had the chance, and I am Nico just to have a familiar face to speak to, but many in the hunt thought she was calling him for other motives and weren't exactly quiet about the accusations. She bared with it though and kept on with her duty, protecting the hunt as the lieutenant. But could she now after everything? In these 3 years things have only gotten worse. Artemis tries to pull a tough and cold facade now, but behind closed doors, Talia had been the only one to see Artemis break down and cry nearly every night for a year. She'd tried to help and comfort her as much as she could, but nothing she did seemed to help, and in one of those nights, where Artemis had fallen asleep with her head on Talia's lap, did Talia learn a shocking reason as to why Phoebe's death had hurt Artemis so much. She and Phoebe had been lovers. With Phoebe taken away in such a brutal fashion and Artemis powerless to help, she'd broken. Her warmth had all but vanished, even to the point members of the hunt tried to avoid her. Her normally intense silver-yellow eyes had dulled along with the moon, and she trusted no one, save maybe for Talia herself. D.A. Chapter 36. Goodbye Ivy. She and Phoebe had been lovers. With Phoebe taken away in such a brutal fashion and Artemis powerless to help, she'd broken. Her warmth had all but vanished, even to the point members of the hunt tried to avoid her. Her normally intense silver-yellow eyes had dulled along with the moon, and she trusted no one, save maybe for Talia herself. Oh, the irony of how Artemis had not defended her from the hunt's harsh treatment for years, and then, when her lover is taken, she clings onto her little sister for dear life. So that was the hunt now. Cold and empty during the days, barely ever singing at campfires and turning anything that strayed into the camp into a pincushion. New girls had to swear on the sticks to not be part of some group wishing to harm the hunt, and even then had to go through a grace period of a month before Artemis fully swore them in. None had lasted more than a week before requesting to leave. Artemis would be emotionless before her hunters, but at night, she would either request Talia to come to her tent or join Talia in her own, or try to talk about the past for nostalgia, or just cling to Talia. It had been nothing short of a miracle that Artemis hadn't stopped by to drive her chariot for the night rather than leave it on autopilot like usual when Nico had chosen to stop by. It was nighttime now, and Talia was pretty sure that Artemis would be back from her chariot soon, so with a shaky breath, she made a choice. She started to pack up some gear, but mostly some mementos of her favorite hunts or adventures. She stopped as she picked up one particular picture, smiling as she remembered the day. It had been a little over a week after the end of the Titan War, and she along with her cousins had decided to stop by Sally's house to see her and Paul. They'd spent the day and even slept over when Paul and Sally had taken a picture of the three passed out together on a couch after watching some terrible comedy movie. Percy had been in the middle with his arms open and head thrown back, Nico leaning back against him while Talia was on the other side with her head in Percy's lap. Sally was in the background giving a sweet smile while ruffling Percy's hair softly. The corner of the picture had, "One family," written into it by Sally before she'd given it to Talia, and she was sure Nico and Percy had their own as well. She felt a single tear roll down her cheek as she looked at the picture before putting it away with the rest. Once packed, she stepped out, not looking back at the tent that had been hers for over a decade. She walked silently out of the camp towards a clearing a fair distance away and spotted Artemis sitting on a downed log while looking up at the moon. It had never been bright again after Phoebe's death, and she knew many of the gods were concerned about Artemis, but she never let any of them in. Talia sighed as she walked up and sat beside the goddess, not knowing how to go about saying her retirement. All she was sure of was that Artemis would fight it, and it was possible that other gods would notice if Artemis got too agitated. However, it seemed that Artemis already had something to say as she turned to look at her. "Talia, can I ask you something?" Talia looked at her unsurely for a moment before nodding. You won't leave me, right?" she asked, and Talia's heart nearly stopped. Does she already know? How? Talia's thoughts raced, but her mouth just worked on. "What? You won't leave me, right?" Artemis asked as a desperate glint appeared in her eyes. "Like the other girls that always come and then fall to monsters or are led astray. You're too strong for that, right?" she asked as she suddenly got a lot closer, making Talia lean back. "You won't leave me like Zoe did, like Phoebe, please," she begged as her eyes got watery. Talia stuttered, completely unprepared for Artemis to question her like this. "I know I haven't been the best lately," she continued as she inched closer. "But please, I'll make it up to you, just promise you'll always be there with me." Talia looked away from her as she stood up, her eyes hidden behind her black bangs. She slowly reached up to her tiara before grasping it with trembling hands, Artemis gasping at the sight. Talia paused as she looked at the tiara before finally meeting Artemis' gaze. "I'm sorry, Artemis," she said as she held up the tiara to the goddess. "But I must resign from my post as your lieutenant and leave the hunt." "What? Why?" Artemis screamed as tears started to stream down her face, her silvery eyes seemingly breaking by the second as the moon got even duller. "I'm sorry, Artemis," Talia chalked out as she looked away from her half-sister's eyes. "But I can't be here anymore." "But why?" Artemis screamed this time as anger started to show in her eyes while she took a step forward, but Talia mirrored her as she took a step back. "What did I do? Is it something you think needs fixing? Is someone forcing you?" Talia looked at Artemis in surprise at that statement but could see the determination in her eyes. She wanted to make sure Talia stayed in any way she could, but Talia had made her choice. I'm sorry, but there is nothing that you can say that will change my mind, she replied as her resolve strengthened and she met Artemis' eyes. But this is your family. Artemis tried but it only got a fierce glare out of Talia. A family, Talia echoed as she looked down for a moment. I had a family, she then looked up again at Artemis as she continued, I had a mom but you killed her. What? Artemis asked as she suddenly looked less sure of herself. You know exactly what I'm talking about, she went on as her anger she'd been suppressing started to bubble up. A kind and wonderful woman by the name of Sally Jackson, she said as Artemis started to shake her head in disbelief. And a man I could have called dad unlike my sorry excuse for one. Thunder boomed in the background but Talia didn't care as she glared at the goddess. And a little sister, but no. You gods and your pride couldn't bear the thought of us being happier with mortals than you. That we would deny godhood and question your ways when it was the whole reason those wars could even start. By now a storm was slowly gaining strength around them as lightning crackled off Talia's frame. The commotion had awoken most of the hunt and had them gathered at the edge of the clearing. They were looking on in worry between the seemingly shell-shocked goddess and the angered demigod. Now I know the truth, Talia continued as she dug a hand into her pocket, fishing for the marble. You are just as much of a deceitful, cruel, manipulating goddess as the rest of them. You murdered Sally and Paul Bloffus, two innocent mortals, with your lover. At Talia's declaration the girls of the hunt gasped while Artemis' mouth hung open and lightning flashed across the sky as rain started to pour. You've ruined so many lives and I refuse to be part of it anymore. With that she threw the tiara at Artemis' feet, making the diadem at the top crack as Artemis looked at it in shock. Before anything else could happen, Talia crushed her hand around the marble, the tiny obsidian shattering into a fine powder as darkness leaked off it and encompassed her. She could feel the familiar sensation of shadows holding onto her, letting her know that a shadow jump was imminent so before she could go, she locked eyes with Artemis and smirked before saying something to really send the goddess over the edge. And Artemis, Umbra says hello. Talia saw something snap in the goddess' eyes as she said that, an unholy anger taking over as her bow materialized in her hands but before she could even aim it the shadows swallowed Talia, jumping her from that place and beyond the reach of the gods. Talia felt as if she was being tossed in and out of a washer for several seconds before the shadows suddenly released her, making her fall into a heap on, someone. Get off, whoever it was under her groaned as she sat up. She shook her head to get rid of the dizziness before looking around. She was in what looked like a large living room with the walls made of black marble and some couches currently occupied. She didn't really notice who as she immediately looked beneath her to see she'd landed and was straddling Nico's chest while he gave her an irritated look. Thals, you're kind of making it hard to breath, he muttered making her eyebrow twitch in annoyance as she smacked him before getting up and looking around at all the staring faces that she didn't recognize save for her brother, Jason. Who was sitting beside a grown woman that looked suspiciously familiar with her rich brown hair but had eyes beginning as purple and turning to light blue as they drew closer to the center with pink pupils. The woman was beaming at her before she suddenly ran at her, shifting into a child form all the while before jumping and screaming, Auntie Talia. Talia caught the flying missile by reflex while looking at her bewildered. Andromeda. D.A. Chapter 37. Heirs Complete I. With Percy. Same time to Talia leaving Hunt. Percy quickly walked out of the shadows of a palm tree and back onto a familiar beach, the first rays of dawn coming over the horizon. He didn't stop to admire the view though as he walked directly towards the hulking figure looking out over the sea, his trusty club at his side. Percy walked up until he stood at Hercules' side, looking out over the sea as well before beginning. So, you made a choice? He asked. Was Hercules' reply without looking at him. What is your goal in the end? Removing the Olympian Council and generally fixing all the shit they screwed up, and making them suffer but that's a little more personal, he answered with a shrug. And you don't think you'll become the very same thing in a couple of centuries? Hercules asked dubiously. Who knows, Percy replied with a shrug. Maybe we might turn out better, maybe not. The best I can do is try and I certainly won't remain silent while the Olympians keep running this show and their enemies keep coming back just to mess everyone up again. Considering they're mostly immortal and or don't have souls and reform anyways, you'll face the same problem, Hercules replied. Oh, I wouldn't worry about that, Percy replied slyly while not mentioning the law of succession. Chaos made it only for the eyes of the primordial originally and it could be risky letting it become common knowledge to other immortals or demigods. Last thing they needed was power-hungry gods and mortals alike challenging each other left and right for power and titles. Luckily there were several safety measures in place meant just for that situation. For one, power and domains taken would remain mostly dormant until the successor gained approval from the governing bodies. In other words, a new primordial needed the approval of a protogonoi council to make a full claim, same with gods and titans though the protogonoi council supersedes all of them. Hercules could technically duel him and challenge him for the right to become the heir of Night, but without Nyx's approval, Hercules would only gain a minor blessing's worth of power and control which Nyx could strip in a heartbeat. 2 is that a challenge can be denied but then again, with the pride of gods, who would? Not to mention if someone was already in a death match then the law could be called in mid-fight to raise the stakes. The only reason Percy himself had gained so much power when he defeated Gaia was that she didn't share her domain with anyone so there wasn't anyone to try and pry control from him or limit the power. Still, maybe later on he could earn the right to know as well, Percy thought as he waited for Hercules to ask anything else. It took a few minutes but then Hercules snorted before asking, "So if I leave with you, what will you have me do?" "Well, you're a powerful fighter but that wasn't my original goal," Percy answered while tucking his hands into his pockets. "I wanted you either out of the fight completely or on our side but not to fight for us." "And why not?" Hercules asked with a raised eyebrow. "I won't be starting this war for you so I don't expect you to put your life on the line for me," he answered with a shrug. "Personally I would have been happy fighting the entire thing alone." "You have got to be kidding me," Hercules said as he looked at Percy as if he was an idiot. "Not really," Percy replied nonchalantly. "In terms of fighting skill I know the Olympians aren't a threat and with the power I'll gain soon, they won't be a threat even with their symbols of power, but a war fought by one man would undoubtedly take decades or even centuries. Too many innocent lives could be dragged into it and I know the Olympians will use every bit of threats, favors, and blackmail they have to get their forces up against me for a war that is only aimed at them. That's why I'm not even bothering to raise an army, just a few trusted friends is all I need. And if you won, what of the surviving demigods and minor gods? Well, obviously oaths to not betray or try to create chaos but otherwise they can be left alone. This war isn't on them so if they just want to live out their days in peace, then by all means, Percy replied while giving Hercules a small smile. So, any more questions? Hercules looked at him intently for a few minutes before smirking slightly. Only one, when the Hades are we getting out of here? Percy grinned before responding, not to offend you big guy but I will need an oath on sticks to not run off or betray me the moment you're free. Hercules didn't even hesitate, probably expecting just that. With his oath done and the thunder signaling the sealing of it Percy cheered. Now that's what I wanted to hear, Percy said while clapping Hercules on the shoulder before walking further down the beach. He could hear Hercules follow behind him but at the moment he wasn't focused on him. Instead he spread his senses as far as he could around the island, looking for the focus point of the island's enchantment meant to keep Hercules here. Sure, the Olympians could erect barriers with their power but to contain strong immortals or gods it would require constantly fed power from the gods so they usually focused the barrier to a point with a rune of some kind connected to an alternate power source or domain. These runes were usually invisible and hard to reach but with his shadows, he could search and contact the rune. It took him a few minutes but soon he found the rune, this one formed of constantly shifting wind 100 or so meters above the center of the island. He grinned as he reached forward as if grasping a lock, his shadows mirroring his action as they contacted the winds forming the runes. Had it been night it would have been all too easy to break the rune but with the sun rising he had to generate the darkness rather than control what was available. So with that he focused his shadows while his hand slowly closed. He could feel the rune resisting as if in his hand as his power faced off against the godly signature of several Olympians. I'm impressed it took this much to contain Hercules, he thought as he brought his second hand up and grasped it as well. He started to flare his power to the point he was radiating darkness as the wind picked up around him and the sand below him was blown back. He actually felt a slight sweat form as he started to pry his hands apart, imagining his shadows doing the same to the rune. The wind around the entire island picked up and the ground started to shake but he wasn't deterred as with a final roar, he ripped his hands apart. Following that he felt the rune break along with the sound of shattering glass ringing around the island. Damn, Percy sighed as he let his arms fall to his sides before taking a look around him. He scratched his neck sheepishly as he noticed that he was in a crater now and a good portion of the beach looked chewed up and was steaming slightly, odd considering some bits of sand and palm trees were frozen. Note to self, practice flaring power and not destroying everything around me. He then searched for Hercules and found him on his ass a few meters away with his hair all messed up and blown back along with frost on his beard. Percy had the decency to look sheepish before offering the famous hero a hand up. Once they were both up and Hercules fixed his face as best he could with his hand, Percy looked around, feeling several godly signatures focusing on the island and moments away from arriving. Get ready to jump, he said. Wah! Hercules didn't get a chance to speak as they shadow traveled before any god could arrive. Percy could have sworn he caught Hercules nearly shriek in surprise, but he didn't let the thought bother him for now as they soon arrived at their destination. They both materialized out of the shadows into Nyx's grand meeting room. It was basically a mini throne room in a U-shape facing a large set of tables in the center so that everyone could speak. And the room was currently in use with most of the forces currently allied with Percy aside from those that may be summoned to Olympus with the current breakout of Hercules. Several sets of eyes focused on them before widening comically as most recognized Hercules standing beside him. Hercules shuffled under the attention before glancing to Percy to see what he was supposed to do. Percy couldn't really answer him since at the moment he had a very angry ex-hunter to deal with. The moment his eyes locked with Talia's, who was sitting beside Jason and Nico at the tables, Hades broke loose. Talia shot up while looking at him with a glare to rival Nyx, damn terrifying, before she rushed at him with a lightning-coated fist. He knew dodging would not help him in the end, so he mained up and took it. It stung like a bitch, but he didn't say anything as several more fists followed until Talia was panting while looking at him, the skin of her knuckles torn with possibly fractured or outright broken bones, but she seemed to be ignoring it for now. He could taste the coppery tinge of blood in his mouth from having a split lip, but he still smiled before speaking. Hey Thals, he said warmly, much to the incredulous looks or in the case of the protagonoi present, amusement. Equals 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 equals. N. First off, this isn't a romance story, so pairings won't have much building unless crucial to the story. Like Percy with Rhea, Hestia. That affects the story a lot, so I'll give chapters to build them up. If it is a harem member, I might just show up with them suddenly being together or a little exposition, just don't expect the whole courting and all. On that note, for Percy. He is going to be king with Rhea, Hestia as queens. It isn't Percy's harem but their harem. If someone wants to please the king, they need to please the queens too. It won't be big though, but I will try to make it satisfying. D.A. Chapter 38. Heirs complete 2. He knew dodging would not help him in the end, so he mained up and took it. It stung like a bitch, but he didn't say anything as several more fists followed until Talia was panting while looking at him, the skin of her knuckles torn with possibly fractured or outright broken bones, but she seemed to be ignoring it for now. He could taste the coppery tinge of blood in his mouth from having a split lip, but he still smiled before speaking. Hey Thals, he said warmly, much to the incredulous looks or in the case of the protagonoi present, amusement. Talia didn't reply, instead just sniffing as her eyes got watery before she tackled him in a hug, her face buried in his chest. He kept his smile as he wrapped his arms around her, pulling her closer as his head rested on her head. He simply held onto her as she sobbed for a few minutes, letting her emotions after several years of burying them finally out. While she did that, he did a quick headcount of who was present at the moment. So far it was Nyx, Tartarus, Eros, Phanes, Hemera, Ether, Rhea, Andromeda, Leto, Phoebe, Jason, Nico, Mnemosyne, Damocin, Medusa, Lamia, and Styx. Some gods were missing like Hecate, so he guessed that the Olympians had already called a council meeting to discuss the disappearance of two children of Zeus. Good headcount all things considered, and besides, I'm pretty sure we have a few more to add later on, he thought before pulling back from Talia, which required a little coaxing from him to get her to loosen her hold. Thals, come on, he whispered gently, too low for anyone else to hear. All he got was a muffled response as she shook her head, so he brought down his head lower to hear her better. What? Do, bay me, Ian, she whispered in a soft voice. He sighed a bit as he got a finger under her chin and softly tilted her up to look at her face, using his thumb to clear away her tears. Tell me again, he said softly, looking into her electric blue eyes. Don't leave me again, please, she said as she pulled closer again to hug him to her. He smiled as she said that and returned the embrace. Of course, he said while rubbing her back before adding, it was already hard enough to leave so many of my precious people behind, so I'm not letting you go anytime soon. He felt her nod a little before she took a shaky breath and finally released him, her face clearing up as a small smile graced her face. Feeling better? He asked cheekily, to which she lightly smacked his shoulder. Yeah, she replied while looking around for a moment before muttering, still hard to believe you have this many people behind you on this. She then looked at her godly half-brother. Hi. Hello, Hercules greeted after blinking a few times. I'm Hercules and you? Talia Grace, daughter of Zeus, she replied, though at the mention of Zeus it came out bitter. Oh, a sister, I see, Hercules said with an understanding nod before looking at Percy. Don't look at me, I don't run the show here, he said while pointing to Nyx. She giggled in response before gesturing to the available seats, then why don't you get seated so we can get on with this meeting? The three nodded before moving towards the tables but stopped as Eros cleared his throat as he stood up with everyone's attention. I do believe some seating needs to change though, just to get them used to it. Seating? Percy asked with a tilt of the head. Why, the seats of the new Protogonoi Council, Nyx cheered before waving her hand. At that several thrones, 7 in fact appeared. 2 were directly beside Nyx, 1 between Eros and Phanes, Hemera and Ether, 1 beside Tartarus, and then the rest at the ends of the U, all plain. If you would, Ether said with a gesture to the thrones. Percy smiled as he nodded and took one of the thrones beside Nyx, Rhea taking the other next to him. Andy was between Eros and Phanes while Jason mirrored her with Ether and Hemera. Styx and Phoebe took 2 of the remaining thrones, much to the shock of some. Ah, what about the 7th? Percy asked curiously but was then surprised to see Nico take it. Wait, what? He asked in surprise since he hadn't been aware at all the Nico was to be an heir as well. It was then that he noted Nico looked different, with swirls of red in his normally pitch black eyes, a slightly larger build, and a slightly darker than usual aura around him. It didn't take Percy long to guess whose blessings he had as he looked at Tartarus in a silent question. Tartarus caught his look before simply saying, we had a good talk earlier and he seemed up to the challenge. Well damn, Percy muttered as he settled in his seat before looking at the tables. So, how are we starting this? Before anyone could reply there was a flash in the center of the room making most have to look away. When the glow died down everyone looked back to see a man, around 6 foot, 2 with a very light build bordering on skinny but not quite. He had white hair with a grayish tone and small goatee, dressed in gray suite with small constellations on it. His gray-blue eyes were brimming with intelligence and wisdom thanks to millennia of experience, his aura commanding respect like only a primordial could. Hey, Orinus, what a pleasant surprise, Nyx greeted as her younger brother smiled while nodding at her. A pleasure sister, though I do believe business comes first, he replied. Indeed, she agreed before Orinus turned and looked straight at Talia, making her squirm slightly under his gaze. Ah, Talia Grace, just the girl I was waiting for. Me? Talia asked nervously while pointing at herself, her hands freshly healed by Leto when Talia had sat down a moment ago. But of course, I need an heiress, don't I? He retorted to many surprised gasps while Talia gaped like a fish. Don't worry dear, we'll talk in detail later but for now, would you do me the honor allowing me to bless you? He asked before adding. And don't worry, unlike your brother you don't need to disown your father since his domains already align with my own so there is no risk of you spontaneously combusting from power overload. What about the blessing of Artemis? Jason asked in concern. Could that with her natural power already be a little much? No, since the blessing only gives skills and partial immortality, nothing in the terms of powers, Orinus replied as Talia numbly walked up to him before looking him in the face. Are you sure it should be me? She asked as she searched his eyes but Orinus simply returned a smile. You're far stronger than you think Talia Grace and I know you'll make me proud as an heiress, he said, now, hold still. Orinus quickly tapped her on the shoulder, making her glow with her blessing for a moment before it died down. Not much changed aside from Talia suddenly looking in her mid-20s, her natural age, which meant that she filled out to it leaving her hunter apparel a little too tight. Nyx fixed that though with a snap of her eyes while removing the silver coloration. Percy appreciated the view for a few seconds before noting her eyes. They had deepened to a darker blue with a very light, almost grayish-blue tendrils of electricity passing within her irises and equally glowing pupils. With her changes finished Orinus nodded before waving his hand as 2 new thrones appeared so that he and Talia could sit. Once everyone was settled Nyx cleared her throat to have the spotlight. Okay, now that we have 8 seats set, I do believe we can progress with the plan, Nyx said as she turned to Percy. You remember what I said before about the new council, right? Percy nodded before facing the others and explaining. Well, to begin with, most of you already know how the Protogonoi have decided to move on and so find heirs to take over their places and form a new council. Nyx originally wanted me to wait until I had at least 5 seats ready for claiming so that the actual council could form before anything like war is declared. Now that we have 8, it is all a matter of having 5 claim their domains along with creating a center point to our rule. So what are the seats filled exactly? Lamia asked while raising her hand adorably. Nyx chuckled before answering, Percy, heir of night, darkness, and shadow. Andromeda, heiress of love, attraction, desire, and procreation. Rhea, heiress of earth. Jason, heir of light, day, and upper atmosphere. Nico, heir of the pit. Styx, a new primordial seat of oaths and hatred which will be instated with the formation of the council and make sure that even Protogonoi will be held to any oath on her name or suffer the consequences. Phoebe, once a titan of prophecy and now heiress of Anarchy and the domains of inevitability, compulsion, and necessity. And now Talia, heiress of Uranus, the domain of heavens or all sky. Nyx paused for a moment before continuing, mind you, these domains might not necessarily be the only ones. Until Phoebe makes her claim and takes her seat in the council, the full control of the domains and the extent of domains to each primordial won't be known. She will be the equivalent of the fates to the new council. D.A. Chapter 39, Heirs Complete 3. Nyx paused for a moment before continuing, mind you, these domains might not necessarily be the only ones. Until Phoebe makes her claim and takes her seat in the council, the full control of the domains and the extent of domains to each primordial won't be known. She will be the equivalent of the fates to the new council. They sat in silence for a moment as everyone digested the information before Nyx looked to Percy again. He nodded in understanding before clearing his throat and beginning to speak. So, though the seats are filled for now, it doesn't mean we are ready to move on. At the moment, aside from myself, Andromeda, Rhea, and Phoebe, the rest haven't even claimed their rights to being heirs yet and are certainly not ready to take over the domains. So until at least one more is ready to become a full primordial, we are going to bid out time and train. Jason, Nico, Talia, Tartarus said in a deep and gravelly voice. I know this is sudden for you 3 considering it has only been a few days, but you need to prepare for the worst training of your lives. I will oversee it personally. At his words the 3 mentioned shuddered, already having premonitions of what Tartarus training would bring them. You'll be in my prayers, Percy said to them while wiping away a tear of sympathy. All 3 flipped him the bird in response to many amused chuckles. Why are you all laughing? Nyx suddenly asked before smirking deviously at them. You've thrown your lot in with us and that means training for you too. Percy was sure he caught several pathetic whimpers coming from the table as many looked at Nyx in horror. But I'm not even fighting, Leto protested. True, but that doesn't mean I can't prepare you in case you need to defend yourself. The war won't be fought from here but on the surface, so you need to be ready. You know the Olympians won't take kindly to you trying to stay neutral, Nyx replied seriously, making many sober up. So, Damison started as he leaned down slightly due to his immense size. What is the plan moving forward? Mostly to train, but I will continue on the surface and try to see if there are any other gods that could be convinced to remain neutral. Monsters too now that I think about it, but I really don't like Echidna, so that might not work out, Percy answered while rubbing his chin. I've already got Atlas with us too, so the plan for removing the Pillar of the Skies is already prepared. How'd you get Atlas? Hercules asked incredulously while others just stared at Percy. He smirked before replying, I made him a deal. Part of it is me taking the skies from him and then him doing one request for me. And after? Leto asked curiously. Percy glanced at Rhea, who smiled back before he replied, I'm still angered about how he caused his own daughter's death, so there will be a price to pay. It won't be sending him to the pit or anything, but Rhea plans on having him make up for his errors while also taking him off the battlefields, unless he willingly joins on our side. Otherwise, he'll be in a form of house arrest without the actual punishment. So how do you plan on making him pay back for his crimes? Phoebe asked this time. Don't worry sister, it will be a productive use of his many skills and talents, Rhea answered this time with a small smile. Okay, and how long do you think we have before the Olympians realize something is going on? Medusa asked. Before she could be answered, another flash illuminated the middle of the room. With it appeared Hecate, dressed in a green chiton and shawl while her brilliantly green eyes glowed with annoyance as she huffed while glaring at Percy. What? He asked after a few seconds of staring. You just had to make a show of freeing Hercules. She asked while tapping her foot. It wasn't that bad, all I did was wreck the beach a bit, Percy replied sheepishly. Not that bad. Hercules chimed in as he looked at Percy as if he'd grown a second head. You didn't just tear up the beach flaring your power, you made the whole damn island shake and created a storm. Whoops. He said after a few seconds with a shrug. Whoops, he says. Hecate shouted while raising her arms in exasperation before looking at some of the others. The lot of you have basically driven Olympus insane in just a few days. Do tell, Nyx said eagerly as she leaned forward. Let's recap, Hecate said as she snapped a chair into existence before sitting. Olympus was already tense with Percy's disappearance and even the hunt failing to find him. Then, 3 years ago, Artemis's adopted daughter, which was actually a kidnapped Andromeda after Artemis murdered her mortal mother, was taken back by Rhea and Percy in his wolf form under the name Umbra. Don't even forget how he killed her eldest huntress, Phoebe, which made Artemis even worse than before. She was her lover, Talia said, making everyone look at her in confusion. Phoebe, turns out she was Artemis' lover, so the death really hit her. The hunt hasn't had any new members since, and Artemis is mostly a shell of herself now. Huh, who knew? Nyx muttered before looking at Hecate to continue. So, all of a sudden in the span of 3 days, guess what? Jason finds out his girlfriend is cheating on him with Apollo and catches them in the act. Damn Apollo, Percy and Jason growled at the same time before looking at each other. Whoever gets a hold of him first gets to end him, Jason suggested. Fair enough, Percy agreed before looking to an increasingly annoyed Hecate as she glared at him. Sorry, please continue. Hecate huffed before doing just that. So that led to a fight which ended with Jason beating Apollo up a little and then Andromeda intervening and actually knocking Apollo out, with Mnemosyne clearing his memories along with Jason's ex. So that leads to a confused god thinking he got bested by a demigod that shouldn't be that powerful, which, as you all know, Olympus does not like the thought of a demigod strong enough to fight on par with gods running around unsupervised. But, surprise, Jason and Nico disappeared, leading to higher tension. Then, the unthinkable happens and Talia quits the hunt while telling Artemis off. By the way, very clever to throw out Artemis' relation with her deceased hunter out in open. Zeus caught that since he was listening in because you were badmouthing him and now he's grilling Artemis about it. Hecate then paused before adding a glare to her look directed at Talia, however, saying, Umbra says hi. Before you left not only sent Artemis into hysterics but also tipped the Olympians off that Umbra is something to watch out for, and now they have Lupa's pack on a search for this mystery wolf. Granted, what they're most worried about now was the unfamiliar godly power they felt when Hercules was released, and trust me when I say, that island was not the only thing shaking, oh. And Camp Jupiter is going nuts without their Pontifex Maximus, and there is even more drama with the actual Olympians themselves. Such as, Hemera asked curiously while chewing on popcorn, since when did she have that? Well, with Apollo's recent affair and the fact that he doesn't seem to realize he is married now, Annabeth went off on his ass, which meant that Athena was trying to skin Apollo as well. Then there was Zeus going between, trying to hold Athena back while glaring at Artemis for finding a loophole in her maiden oath. Then there was Aphrodite crying her eyes out ever since she had a falling out with her daughter a day after the cheating incident, which meant Ares was annoyed to Hades and back while trying to pick a fight with anybody. I swear, at this point just keep doing what you're doing and Olympus will implode before you can even think of declaring war, Hecate finished while slumping in her chair after getting everything off her chest. Everyone sat in stunned silence after listening to all that, trying to simply imagine the havoc on Olympus at the moment. Percy would have laughed at some of the faces if he wasn't concerned for a particular goddess. He glanced at Rhea beside him and he saw that she was thinking along the same lines as him, so he turned back to Hecate and asked, what of Hestia? He got some odd looks but he ignored them as Hecate sat straighter before answering, the same as she's been ever since your disappearance. Quiet, doesn't really even bother trying to stop arguments anymore. I hear she sometimes talks with Hades when he bothers to show up for meetings, but otherwise she's just there. Percy frowned as he looked down at his lap. He felt Rhea take his hand and squeeze it for comfort, but he still couldn't shake the feeling of wanting to see Hestia. If there was anyone who deserved to know what was going on and be taken away from Olympus and their misery, it was Hestia. He wanted to contact her so badly, but then again, most of the hearths she goes to are in the camps or the main hearth in her palace. He could get to her easily but not unnoticed, which would mean letting the Olympians officially know that a threat is rising. He glanced at Rhea again, meeting her gaze as they had a silent conversation on the span of seconds before nodding. Perhaps they could openly declare war yet, but it didn't mean they were going to wait that long to get Hestia with them. So, moving on, Nyx continued after some silence, discussing in detail some of the movements and plans made for the future and whose roles would be where. Percy tuned it out though, already knowing most of them as his thoughts strayed to warm, orange eyes and a smile capable of melting anyone's heart. I'm coming, Hestia, just remember my promise. D.A. Chapter 40. As time passes I. 1 year later, 5 Tartarus. Percy looked on silently from his perch at the bay, his mind wandering from place to place. He thought to his cousins and their training, his allies and their maneuvers under the nose of Olympus, and his growing feelings of love. Love. It had been some time since he truly thought of the word and what it meant to him. He thought he knew when he'd tried dating Annabeth only to have it broken with her lies and the meddling of Aphrodite, so he closed his heart off. He learned to fear the pain of heartbreak and his emotions even as one goddess slowly rekindled a spark of hope in him, but he didn't realize it until she wasn't with him. Perhaps it was a higher destiny that another goddess, the very mother of the first one, would feed and nurture that spark into becoming a roaring fire. Passionate and strong, capable of incinerating anything that dared try and harm either of them now. He'd come to grips with it and knew he felt genuine love for Rhea and Hestia. Every morning waking up with Rhea in his arms felt so right, yet incomplete. As if their final piece of a puzzle was missing. Even Rhea showed signs of thinking the same thing as she sometimes brought Hestia up in conversations, usually on plans of how to bring her to them. Sometimes Percy would even notice that Rhea would unconsciously search for an extra presence while asleep, one arm around Percy and the other grasping at the empty space on his other side. He brought it up and she tried to play it off as missing Andromeda since his sister had more or less kicked the habit of sneaking into their room when she was around, though she did appear from time to time. She'd actually spent a fair amount of time in the Palace of the Sky nowadays, helping with Talia and Jason's training since Tartarus had to focus greatly on Nico, though the three were tested every week by Tartarus to make sure they were up to his standards. Still, with Andy mostly out and the other immortals each busy with their own tasks or training, Percy and Rhea had a lot of time to themselves to just talk. They discussed everything. Fears and hopes, ambitions and ideas for the world once this was all over, and the possibility of starting a family. It had been a slip of the tongue on Ray's part, but Percy had simply beamed at her and told her how he'd always wanted to form a big family, which made her smile in turn. Of course they both had a growing worry of how Hestia would react to them already being together, but they'd walk that bridge when they got there. Otherwise everything was business as usual. Olympus had settled down slightly, though Hecate reported that tensions were still there, but now Hades was another inside man. Nico had been successful with convincing his father, and bribing Persephone to join them. With that, now they had free rein to travel the underworld, and Percy made one trip that was long overdue. He and Andromeda got to visit their mother and Paul for a day thanks to Hades. It had been an emotional time and they got to release decades worth of tears before telling their parents about everything that had happened. But after that visit he'd had probably one of the best nights of his life. Now it was all a matter of waiting, but every day was grating on his nerves. With every moment he wished he could get a move on, to defeat the Olympians before they even realize what is going on. Before it had been about revenge and he still wanted to make most of the Olympians suffer, but now, it was a matter of removing those dictators so he and his future family could live a life of peace. He was starting to brood on, but then the shadows next to him condensed before Rhea appeared and sat beside him. She didn't say a word as she took his hand in her own and gave it a reassuring squeeze. They sat in silence for a few minutes, simply enjoying the night sky and the cool breeze. After a few minutes Rhea broke the silence though as she looked at him. So, is sitting on the Golden Gate Bridge your favorite spot now? Percy smirked as he looked down at the thick fog rolling beneath the bridge, hiding the bay from sight with the city lights beyond. Who knows? I just find it relaxing, he replied, making her giggle slightly. So how was your mission? He asked after a moment. It went well, Rhea replied while leaning on his shoulder. All Aurea besides Olympus himself are now loyal to me, giving me another connection to my Earth domain. I'm guessing Kithyron and Timolus are the only ones that gave you trouble. Percy asked while recalling how the mountain gods attacked the Argo II on their way over northern Italy. Of course they challenged me, but it wasn't really a hard fight though they were persistent. I made them swear their domains to me just in case, Rhea replied with a smirk. So no chance of backstabbing, nice, Percy said with a chuckle before overlooking the bay again. And what were you thinking about? Rhea asked while looking at him intently. He looked at her for a moment before answering honestly, a lot of things, but it usually went back to Hestia. Rhea nodded in agreement. I understand. I want her with us too, but it just isn't time yet. Yes, but when? He asked as he looked at his clenched fist. Every day since I left, I couldn't help but worry about her. I know what's happening on Olympus must be hard for her, but if she speaks out, who knows what they could do to her. Percy, look at me, Rhea commanded as she touched his chin and tilted his head in her direction, her hazel gold eyes staring into his flaming orbs. They won't touch her, and if they do, you and I will go there and tear them apart ourselves, but until then, have faith that she'll be okay. They kept their eyes locked for several seconds before Rhea leaned in and kissed him. He responded in kind, his arms quickly wrapping around her waist before bringing her closer until she was moved onto his lap, straddling him. Their kiss turned into a heated makeout as Ray's hands dug into his hair while his arms squeezed her closer. Then, out of the blue, Rhea pulled back and looked at him with dangerous eyes. You know I love you, and I love my daughter. She is the only one that still prayed to me during difficult times wishing for guidance, and it broke my heart that we couldn't see each other thanks to Zeus imprisoning me. I miss her and want her here just as much as you, but right now, I'm going to be a little selfish. Wah. He didn't get to finish as the shadows enveloped them and in a few seconds dumped them out on his bed in the House of Night in the same position. Suddenly Rhea pushed him back until he was laying down before running her hands over his chest. I know she'll feel hurt at first when we tell her about us, but I also know that she loves you. I remember some of her last prayers about a man that had finally taken her notice even if she never named you. She'll find it odd, but I'm confident she'll accept it just as I did. However, she suddenly growled as her fangs elongated and her green pupils narrowed into slits. Right here and now, I am not going to wait to fully become yours and make you only mine for the time I have you. With that, she snapped her fingers, making her clothes aside from her lacy black bra and panties to disappear. So Percy, she said as she leaned down and nibbled his ear, making him groan. Make me yours. If you want to support me or just to read ahead of the public release, you can join my Patreon. Patreon, Moonhorse.